In a city built on dreams and designer labels, Lina Morales learned the cruelest lesson of all. Invisibility isn't about being unseen, it's about being looked through. Tonight, in a restaurant where a single meal costs more than her weekly paycheck, she would discover that humiliation has no price limit. But across a room thick with judgment and champagne, a man who owned half the city would see what no one else had bothered to notice, the woman who'd been right in front of him all along. Stay with me until the end of this story, and if it touches your heart, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Lina's journey can travel. The green dress had cost Lina Morales 3 weeks of careful denial, 3 weeks of walking past the coffee shop instead of stopping for her usual morning comfort, 3 weeks of skipping lunch, telling herself the gnawing in her stomach was just nervousness, just anticipation, just the price of hoping for something better. The fabric wasn't expensive, not by any reasonable measure, but it had hung in the window of a small boutique near the bus stop, catching the afternoon light in a way that made Lina pause every single day on her way home from work. It was the color that had captured her first, not the aggressive emerald of wealth or the pale mint of spring weddings, but something in between, the deep, honest green of new leaves, of things growing despite difficult soil. The dress had short sleeves and a simple cut that wouldn't embarrass her, wouldn't announce her presumption too loudly. It was a dress that whispered rather than shouted, and that felt safer somehow. She'd finally bought it on a Tuesday using money she'd been saving for the electric bill, telling herself this was an investment. Marcus had been talking about taking her somewhere nice for weeks now, somewhere that required something better than her usual uniform of jeans and comfortable shoes, somewhere that would prove he was serious about her, about them, about a future that included more than late-night texts and promises that always seemed to dissolve in daylight. Now, standing outside La Lumiere, a restaurant whose name she'd had to practice pronouncing in the mirror, Lina felt the dress differently. The fabric that had seemed sophisticated in the boutique's forgiving light now felt thin, cheap, obviously wrong against the gleaming facade of glass and gold before her. Through the windows, she could see candlelight dancing across white tablecloths, could see the easy confidence of people who belonged in places like this, who never had to check their bank balance before ordering an appetizer. Her phone buzzed. Finally. "Running late, babe. Get us a table. Somewhere good. I'll be there soon." Lina read the message 3 times, searching for warmth in the abbreviated words, finding only her own desperate need to believe. She'd been waiting outside for 20 minutes already, watching couples drift through the brass-handled doors, watching the valet park cars that cost more than everything she'd ever owned combined. The November air carried that particular Los Angeles chill that people from other places never believed existed, the kind that seeped through thin fabric and settled in bones that were already tired from a 10-hour shift. She should have eaten something. The thought came too late, as most of her self-care realizations did. She'd been too nervous, too excited, too busy imagining how Marcus would look at her in this dress, how his face would change when he realized she could be the kind of woman who belonged in places like this. Now her stomach felt hollow and anxious, and the last thing she wanted was to walk into that restaurant alone, to announce her solitary state to a room full of coupled satisfaction. But the cold was getting worse, and the valet, a young man with kind eyes and an unfortunate awareness of desperation, had started to look at her with something dangerously close to pity. So Lina straightened her shoulders, touched the small silver earrings she'd borrowed from her neighbor Rosa, and pushed through the heavy door into warmth and judgment. The restaurant swallowed her whole. It wasn't just the immediate rush of heat or the subtle perfume of expensive wine and butter-soft music. It was the weight of attention, the way conversation seemed to pause and recalibrate, the way the hostess's professional smile flickered with something that might have been confusion or might have been contempt. Lina had spent the last 4 years of her life moving through spaces like this one, but always through back doors, always with a vacuum or a mop, always with the protective invisibility that came with a cleaning uniform and averted eyes. Without those shields, she felt naked. "Good evening." The hostess was young and beautiful in that particularly Los Angeles way that suggested either exceptional genetics or exceptional intervention. Her dress probably cost more than Lina's monthly rent. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, under Marcus Chen, for 2. Lina hated how small her voice sounded, how the words came out careful and measured, like a child reciting a lesson. The hostess's perfectly shaped eyebrows lifted just slightly as she scanned her tablet. The pause stretched too long. I'm not seeing anything under that name. It should be there. For 7:30. Lena pulled out her phone, scrolling through Marcus's texts, looking for confirmation she suddenly couldn't remember receiving. Had he actually made the reservation? He'd said he would. He'd said to meet him here, to dress nice, to finally let him show her off properly. Let me check again. The hostess's tone had shifted into that particular frequency of professional patience that made Lena's skin crawl. Behind her, Lena could feel the attention of waiting diners, could sense their impatience building like pressure in a closed room. I'm sure it's there, Lena said, and immediately hated herself for the pleading note that had crept into her voice. My boyfriend made it. Marcus Chen. He's in tech. Maybe it's under a company name. The hostess's expression flickered with something Lena couldn't quite name. Recognition, perhaps, or its opposite. I'm sorry, but I'm not finding any reservation. We're fully booked tonight, but I can put you on the waiting list if you'd like. It might be an hour, maybe more. An hour. 60 more minutes of standing here, of feeling the weight of other people's comfort pressing against her discomfort, of watching couples who'd never had to save for weeks to afford hope itself. A table for one or two? The question came gently, but it landed like an accusation. Two, Lena said firmly. Definitely two. He's just running late. The hostess nodded with the kind of sympathy that cut deeper than cruelty. Of course, I'll put you down for two. The bar is just through there if you'd like to wait more comfortably. The bar, where a single glass of wine probably cost what Lena made in 3 hours of scrubbing other people's floors. But she couldn't stand here blocking the entrance, couldn't bear another moment of being the obstacle between these people and their effortless evening. Thank you, Lena managed, and moved toward the bar with as much dignity as she could gather. The bartender, older than the hostess, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen every variation of human disappointment, nodded at her arrival. What can I get for you? Lena slid onto a leather stool that probably cost more than her entire bedroom set. Just water, please. I'm waiting for someone. If he judged her, his face didn't show it. He poured ice water into a crystal glass and set it before her with the same care he might have shown a paying customer. Let me know if you need anything else. The water was good, better than it had any right to be, cold and clean with a slice of lemon she hadn't asked for. Lena sipped it slowly, trying to make it last, trying to look like someone who had every right to occupy this expensive real estate. Around her, the bar hummed with the easy conversation of people who'd never had to choose between electricity and optimism. Her phone sat on the bar beside her water glass. Dark, silent, accusatory in its stillness. She shouldn't check it again. She'd already texted Marcus twice, once to confirm she'd arrived, once to let him know there was no reservation. Texting him a third time would cross some invisible line from interested to desperate, from patient to pathetic. She knew this. She'd learned this the hard way through a series of relationships that had taught her exactly how much space her hope was allowed to occupy in someone else's life. But her fingers found the phone anyway, muscle memory stronger than pride. Nothing. Lena set the phone down, screen side down this time, as if that might protect her from its silence. She took another sip of water and made the mistake of looking up. The restaurant spread before her like a stage set designed to showcase everything she lacked. Couples leaned toward each other over flickering candles, their faces soft with wine and satisfaction. A group of businessmen occupied a large table near the window, their laughter confident and unconsidered. Two women who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine sat near the back, picking at salads that cost more than Lena's entire grocery budget. And there, in a corner booth that managed to be both prominent and private, sat a man alone. Lena noticed him because loneliness recognized its own, even across crowded rooms. He was older than her, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of posture that suggested either military training or the weight of considerable responsibility. His suit was perfect in that way that indicated custom tailoring, and the watch on his wrist caught the light with quiet, devastating expense. A laptop sat closed beside his plate, and his phone rested face down next to an untouched glass of red wine. He looked, Lena thought, like a man who'd been stood up by something more important than a person. She looked away quickly, before he could catch her staring, before her observation could become intrusion. The last thing she needed was to be caught gawking at the kind of man who probably had security teams to handle unwanted attention. Her phone buzzed. Lena's heart jumped, then immediately plummeted as she read the message. Sorry, babe. Something came up at work. Total emergency. Rain check? You understand, right? She stared at the words until they blurred. No apology for the reservation he'd forgotten to make. No acknowledgement of the time she'd spent waiting, the money she'd spent hoping, the nerve she'd gathered to walk into this place at all. Just the casual presumption of her understanding, her flexibility, her infinite capacity to absorb disappointment without complaint. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. What did you even say to this? That yes, she understood? That no, she didn't understand, couldn't understand how someone could be so carelessly cruel. That she'd spent 3 weeks hungry for this dress, this chance, this dream of being worth someone's effort. Before she could type anything, another message arrived. It's not really working out anyway, you know? You're sweet, but we're from different worlds. I need someone who gets my lifestyle. There it was. The truth she'd been avoiding through 6 weeks of late-night conversations and increasingly infrequent dates. The confirmation that every instinct she'd suppressed had been right all along. She wasn't enough. Wouldn't ever be enough. The gap between her world and his wasn't something that could be bridged by a green dress or borrowed earrings or the desperate hope that maybe, finally, someone would see past the surface of her life to the substance underneath. Good luck, though. You'll find someone. Lena's vision tunneled. The restaurant noise receded into a dull roar, like ocean sounds through a heavy door. Her hands shook as she set the phone down, as she tried to remember how breathing worked, as she calculated how quickly she could leave this place without causing a scene. The bartender materialized in front of her. Miss, are you all right? I'm fine. The lie came automatically, a reflex born of years of making herself smaller, easier, less troublesome. I have to go. She stood too quickly. The room tilted slightly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast, that running on nothing but anxiety and rejection made for poor balance. She reached for her small purse, pulling out the few crumpled bills she'd brought for cab fare home. The water's on the house, the bartender said quietly. Even his kindness felt like humiliation. Lena mumbled thanks and turned toward the door, keeping her eyes down, trying to make herself invisible again, trying to remember how to be the person who moved through these spaces without being seen. She made it 3 steps before she heard the voice. Excuse me. Deep, quiet, and directed unmistakably at her. Lena turned. The man from the corner booth stood a few feet away, his expression careful, his hands visible and non-threatening. Up close, he was even more intimidating, tall, composed, with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. I'm sorry to bother you, he said, but I couldn't help noticing you were waiting for someone. Lena's face burned. Of course he'd noticed. Everyone had probably noticed. The woman in the cheap green dress, sitting alone at the bar, checking her phone with increasingly desperate frequency. She was a cliché, a cautionary tale, entertainment for people with fuller lives. I was just leaving, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I understand, but I was wondering... He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like uncertainty. My dinner meeting was canceled at the last minute, and I hate eating alone. Would you consider joining me just for the meal? No expectations, no obligations, just company. Lena stared at him. This had to be some kind of joke. Men who looked like this, who wore suits that probably cost more than her car, did not invite women like her to dinner, did not notice her at all unless they needed their houses cleaned or their offices emptied of trash. I don't think, she started. Please. The word was simple, honest. I know how this looks. I know I'm a complete stranger. But you look like you could use a decent meal and a better evening than you've had so far, and I happen to have a table and more food coming than I could possibly eat alone. It seems like a reasonable exchange. Lena's instinct was to refuse, to extract herself from this situation before it could evolve into something more complicated than her current humiliation. But something in his voice stopped her. Not pity, exactly, though there was kindness there. Something more like recognition, like he understood what it meant to be alone in a crowded room, to have plans dissolve into disappointment, to wonder if you'd ever matter to anyone the way they seemed to matter to themselves. I don't have much money, she heard herself say, immediately regretting the admission. I'm not asking you to pay, he said gently. I'm asking you to sit, to talk, to help me salvage an evening that was shaping up to be considerably worse than yours. Against every reasonable instinct, against all the warnings she'd collected over 26 years of learning to protect herself, Lena found herself nodding. Okay, she said softly, just for dinner. The man's face relaxed into something that might have been relief. Thank you. I'm Daniel, by the way. He extended his hand. Lena took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, the firm but gentle pressure of his grip. Lena. Lena, he repeated, and something flickered across his face. Confusion, then recognition, then something she couldn't identify. That's a beautiful name. He led her back through the restaurant, past the staring diners and the curious hostess, to the corner booth she'd noticed earlier. As they walked, Lena became aware of the attention they were drawing, the whispered conversations and raised eyebrows. She didn't belong here, not in this restaurant, not at this man's table, not in whatever story these people were already constructing about her presence. But Daniel seemed oblivious to the stares, or perhaps so accustomed to them they no longer registered. He waited until she slid into the booth before taking his own seat, a small gesture of courtesy that felt foreign and valuable. I have to admit something, he said once they were settled. This is going to sound strange, but I think we've met before. Lena's stomach dropped. This was it. The moment when he recognized her, when the carefully constructed fantasy of this evening collapsed into the reality of who she actually was. I don't think so, she said carefully. No, I'm certain of it. He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. You work at my house, don't you? You're part of the cleaning service. The words hung in the air between them, confirmation of everything she'd feared. He knew. He'd known from the beginning. This wasn't a kind stranger offering dinner to another lonely person. This was her employer, extending what? Pity? Amusement? Some kind of elaborate power play? I should go. Lena started to stand. Wait, please. Daniel's hand moved toward hers, but stopped short of touching, respecting the boundary she was already constructing. I'm not saying that to embarrass you. I'm saying it because I'm embarrassed. You've been working in my home for, 2 years? 3? And I've never once actually seen you. Not really. I've walked past you hundreds of times, and I couldn't tell you your favorite color, or how you take your coffee, or a single thing about your life beyond the fact that you're incredibly good at your job. That's shameful. Lena sank back into the booth, uncertain what to do with his honesty. Most people don't notice the help, she said quietly. It's not personal. It is personal, Daniel countered. It's the most personal failure there is. Treating people like furniture because acknowledging their humanity might complicate your comfort. He leaned back, his expression troubled. I saw you sitting at that bar, and I recognized the look on your face because I've felt it myself. That particular flavor of disappointment when you realize someone you trusted was never worth the trust. And then I recognized you, and I thought, here's someone I've failed to see for years, someone who deserves better than to end her evening crying over cheap wine in a bar. I wasn't crying, Lena said, though her eyes were burning. Not yet, Daniel said gently, but you were close. So was I, if I'm being honest. There's something uniquely depressing about eating expensive food alone while pretending to work, knowing the person who was supposed to be sitting across from you chose literally anything else over your company. Despite everything, the humiliation, the confusion, the sheer surrealism of the situation, Lena felt her lips twitch. What happened to your dinner? Business merger fell through. My dinner companion decided to take his celebration elsewhere. Daniel's smile was rueful. Apparently I'm only good company when I'm useful. Join the club, Lena muttered. Lena Shantan. The waiter appeared young and professional, his expression carefully neutral as he addressed Daniel. Mr. Harrington, are you ready to order? Harrington. The name triggered something in Lena's memory, fragments of conversations she'd overheard while cleaning, magazine covers she'd glimpsed while emptying trash. Daniel Harrington, real estate developer, billionaire. The man who owned half of downtown Los Angeles and most of the politicians who pretended to regulate him. She was having dinner with Daniel Harrington. The realization made her slightly dizzy. "Give us a few minutes," Daniel said to the waiter, who nodded and disappeared. He turned to Lena. "What do you like? And please don't say you're not hungry." "I couldn't possibly," Lena started. "You're hungry?" Daniel interrupted, but gently. "You've been sitting at that bar for 45 minutes watching everyone else eat. The way you looked at the couple next to you when their pasta came out told me everything I needed to know about your evening." Lena felt herself flush. "I can't let you pay for my dinner. It wouldn't be right." "Why not?" "Because I work for you. Because it's complicated." "It's only complicated if we make it complicated," Daniel said. "Right now you're not my housekeeper and I'm not your employer. We're two people who both got stood up, who both ended up in the same place at the same time, who both deserve one decent thing to salvage this disaster of an evening. What's complicated about that?" Everything, Lena thought. Everything was complicated about this. But her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly enough that they both heard it, and Daniel's expression shifted into something that might have been triumph. "The lobster ravioli is excellent," he said. "So is the osso buco, if you eat meat. The vegetarian lasagna is surprisingly good. I know that sounds like damning with faint praise, but I mean it genuinely. And if you're not sure, we can order several things and share. I wasn't kidding about having too much food coming." Lena looked down at the menu, where entrees cost what she made in a day. The prices made her feel sick and hungry in equal measure. "I've never had lobster," she admitted quietly. Daniel's expression softened. "Then you should definitely try it. Life's too short to deny yourself new experiences out of principle." The waiter returned, and Daniel ordered with the ease of someone who'd never had to check prices or calculate tips as percentages of grocery budgets. "Lobster ravioli, osso buco, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Lena's monthly rent." When the waiter left, an awkward silence settled between them. Lena tried to think of something to say, some way to navigate this bizarre situation, but her mind kept circling back to the fundamental absurdity of her presence here. She cleaned this man's house, she scrubbed his toilets and vacuumed his floors, and tried to be invisible because that's what people like him paid people like her to be. And now she was sitting across from him in a restaurant where the silverware probably cost more than everything in her apartment, pretending this was normal, pretending she belonged. "Tell me about the dress," Daniel said suddenly. Lena blinked. "What?" "The green dress. You keep touching the sleeve like it's new, like you're not quite sure it fits right. It's beautiful, by the way. The color suits you." Heat crept up Lena's neck. She'd been doing that, running her fingers over the fabric, checking to make sure it was still there, still real. "I bought it for tonight, for my date." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Then his loss is my unexpected gain." Daniel's voice carried no flirtation, just simple honesty. "Though I hope you didn't buy it just for him. A dress like that should be for you." "I can't really afford to buy dresses for myself," Lena said, then immediately wished she could take the words back. Why was she telling him this? Why was she revealing the precise dimensions of her poverty to a billionaire who probably spent more on ties than she did on rent? But Daniel didn't flinch or offer platitudes. "I understand that feeling more than you might think." "Respectfully, I doubt that." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Daniel's smile was sad. "You'd be surprised. Money solves certain problems, but it creates others. And there are still things I can't afford, just different things. Peace of mind, real privacy, the certainty that anyone in my life actually likes me rather than what I can do for them." He paused. "The ability to sit in a restaurant without everyone watching and wondering who I'm with and why and what it means for their investments." Lena glanced around and realized he was right. People were watching, not obviously, not rudely, but she could feel the weight of their attention, could see the occasional phone lifted for a discreet photo, could sense the speculation building like static electricity. "Is it always like this?" she asked. "Always," Daniel confirmed. "You learn to ignore it, or you don't, and you go crazy. I chose option 1, mostly. The wine arrived, and Daniel poured for both of them despite Lena's half-hearted protest. The first sip was a revelation, smooth and complex. Nothing like the cheap bottles she occasionally split with Rosa. It tasted expensive, which felt both wonderful and wrong. "So tell me something real," Daniel said, settling back against the leather booth. "Not the polite version or the version you think I want to hear. Something true about Lina Morales." The use of her full name surprised her. "How did you know my last name?" "I looked it up after I realized who you were." He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I wanted to know who I'd been treating like furniture for the past few years." Lina took another sip of wine, buying time. "What did you tell someone like Daniel Harrington when he asked for truth? That she was 26 and broke and scared most of the time? That she dreamed small dreams, a studio apartment without mold, a car that didn't require prayer to start, enough money in her account to cover both rent and groceries in the same month? That she'd worn this green dress like armor against a world that had taught her she would never be enough?" "I'm tired," she said finally. "That's the truth. I'm really, really tired of trying so hard to be worth someone's time." The words hung between them, raw and more honest than she'd intended. Lina expected Daniel to change the subject, to retreat into the comfortable small talk that people used to fill awkward moments. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "You are worth someone's time," he said. "You're worth your own time, which is harder and more important. The guy who stood you up tonight, he didn't deserve the effort you put into showing up, into hoping, into being brave enough to risk disappointment." "You don't know anything about him," Lina said, though her defense lacked conviction. "I know he left you waiting in a restaurant without a reservation. I know he texted instead of calling. I know he took the coward's way out." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I know the type. I've been that type. I've hurt people because it was easier than being honest, because I was too focused on what I wanted to consider what they needed. So I know exactly what kind of man sends a message like that to a woman who dressed up and showed up and believed he was worth the effort." The food arrived, interrupting the intensity of the moment. Plates appeared like magic, the lobster ravioli pillowed and perfect, the osso buco falling off the bone, the vegetables arranged like art. The smells alone were overwhelming, rich and complex, and entirely foreign to Lina's usual diet of rice and beans and whatever protein was on sale. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "Wherever looks good," Daniel said, serving her ravioli with a practiced ease that suggested years of business dinners and practiced hospitality. "There's no wrong way to enjoy food." The first bite was a revelation. The pasta dissolved on her tongue, the lobster sweet and delicate. The sauce complex with herbs and butter and flavors she couldn't name. Lina had to close her eyes against the sudden rush of pleasure, against the realization that food could be this good, that life could contain moments of pure sensory joy. When she opened her eyes, Daniel was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not pity, not amusement, something gentler and more complicated. "Good?" he asked. "Better than good," Lina admitted. I've never tasted anything like this." "Then I'm glad you said yes," Daniel said simply, and returned his attention to his own plate. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that felt natural rather than forced. Lina tried the osso buco and the vegetables, tried the bread that was apparently baked fresh every hour, tried to memorize every flavor and texture so she could remember this night when she returned to her regular life of disappointment and dollar menu dinners. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said eventually. Lina nodded, her mouth full of bread that tasted like butter and heaven. "Why do you do it? The cleaning work, I mean. You're obviously intelligent, articulate, capable. Why not something else?" The question that everyone asked, the one that assumed choice, was always available, always simple. Lina swallowed her bread and took a long sip of wine before answering. "Because it pays cash weekly. Because I don't need a college degree or references from jobs I don't have. Because it's flexible enough that I can pick up extra shifts when I need to. Because it's honest work that doesn't require me to smile at men who think my uniform is an invitation or pretend to believe in products I can't afford to buy." She met his eyes directly. Because sometimes survival isn't about choosing what you want to do. It's about doing what's available and hoping that's enough. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "That was a stupid question." "No," Lena corrected. "It was a privileged question. There's a difference." "Fair point." He refilled her wine glass. "What would you do if you could do anything? If money and time and circumstances weren't factors?" It was the kind of question people asked at parties, the kind of hypothetical that required no real answer because everyone understood it was just conversation, just ways to fill time. But something in Daniel's tone suggested he actually wanted to know, actually cared about the answer. Lena hesitated, then decided what the hell. She'd already revealed more of herself than she'd intended. What was one more truth? "I'd bake," she said quietly. "I'd have a little bakery somewhere with actual foot traffic and decent rent. Nothing fancy, just bread and pastries and cakes for occasions. Things that make people happy, things that matter." She could feel herself blushing, could hear how ridiculous it sounded. "I know it's stupid." "It's not stupid," Daniel interrupted firmly. "It's specific and genuine and achievable. Those are rare qualities in a dream. It's achievable for people who have capital and credit and family money to fall back on," Lena said. "For people like me, it's just another way to feel bad about what I can't have." "You bake now?" Daniel asked. "When I can afford ingredients, when my oven works." Lena shrugged. "I make bread sometimes, for my neighbor. She's elderly, lives alone. She tells me it reminds her of her mother's baking back in Mexico. That's worth more than money, knowing I gave someone a good memory." Daniel set down his fork, his expression intent. "That's exactly what I mean. You already understand the most important part of any business, creating value for people. Giving them something they didn't know they needed until you showed them it existed. Everything else is just logistics and paperwork." "Logistics and paperwork cost money I don't have," Lena reminded him. "Money can be found," Daniel said. "Passion is harder to manufacture." He paused, seemed to consider something, then continued. "I started my first business with $5,000 I borrowed from a loan shark. Literal criminal interest rates. I was 22 and convinced I knew everything, which meant I knew nothing. I failed spectacularly. Lost the money, lost my apartment, spent 6 months sleeping in my car and showering at the gym while I tried to figure out what went wrong." Lena stared at him. This didn't match any version of Daniel Harrington she'd constructed from magazine articles and overheard conversations. "You lived in your car?" A 1998 Honda Civic with a broken passenger window and a check engine light that was more suggestion than warning. His smile was self-deprecating. "I tell people it taught me humility, but mostly it taught me how to sleep sitting up and which fast food restaurants wouldn't call the cops on someone using their bathroom to brush their teeth." "I can't imagine," Lena started, then stopped, because actually she could imagine it perfectly. She'd been 2 missed paychecks away from that reality more times than she wanted to count. "My point," Daniel continued, "is that everyone starts somewhere, usually somewhere uncomfortable and uncertain. The difference between people who make it and people who don't isn't usually talent or even luck. It's just stubbornness, the refusal to accept that this is as good as it gets." "Must be nice to have stubbornness as an option," Lena said quietly. "Some of us have to be practical, have to accept that this might actually be as good as it gets, because the alternative is ending up homeless or worse." Daniel's expression shifted into something that looked like shame. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm sitting here in a $15,000 suit telling you to follow your dreams while you're doing the math on whether you can afford cab fare home. That's unconscionable." The apology surprised her enough that Lena softened slightly. "I appreciate what you're trying to say. I do. But inspiration doesn't pay rent, and dreaming doesn't put food in the refrigerator. I learned that a long time ago." They finished the meal in a different kind of quiet, one weighted with things unsaid and realities acknowledged. When the dessert menu came, Daniel ordered tiramisu without consulting her, and when it arrived, rich and coffee-soaked and impossibly decadent, he pushed it toward the center of the table with 2 spoons. "Share it with me," he said. "Consider it payment for putting up with my privileged philosophizing." Lena took a bite and felt something in her chest loosen slightly. The dessert was perfect, the company was unexpected, And for just this moment, she allowed herself to stop calculating costs and consequences. Tomorrow, she'd go back to her real life. Tonight, she could pretend she was someone who belonged in places like this, who deserved good wine and honest conversation, and the attention of a man who actually seemed to see her. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel said as they worked their way through the tiramisu. "You've been telling me things all night," Lena pointed out. "Something true, though, something I don't usually admit." He set down his spoon, his expression serious. "I'm lonely. Profoundly, exhaustingly lonely. I'm surrounded by people all day long, employees, business partners, family, people who want things from me or want to be seen with me or want to use me as a stepping stone to whatever they're actually after. But I can't remember the last time I had a conversation with someone who wasn't performing, who wasn't trying to impress me or manage me or extract something from my presence." Lena considered this. "You think I'm not performing?" "I think you're being yourself," Daniel said. "Maybe because you don't think I matter enough to lie to, or maybe because you're too tired to pretend. Either way, it's refreshing." "I matter so little that honesty costs me nothing," Lena translated. "That's a depressing superpower." "That's not what I meant," Daniel started. "I know what you meant," Lena interrupted, "but not unkindly. And I think you're probably lonelier than you realize if you're sitting here telling me your problems over expensive wine. We're not friends, Mr. Harrington. We're not anything. In 12 hours, I'll be back in your house cleaning your bathroom, and you'll walk past me without seeing me, same as you have for years. This is just a moment. It doesn't mean anything beyond tonight." "Does it have to?" Daniel asked quietly. "Does everything have to mean something permanent to be worthwhile?" Lena thought about Marcus, about the 3 weeks of hunger for a dress that meant nothing to a man who'd never intended to show up, about every relationship she'd built on hope and scaffolding, trying to convince herself that temporary attention could become permanent affection if she just tried hard enough, wanted it badly enough, made herself small enough to fit into someone else's life. "No," she admitted. "But it helps to know what something is, so you don't waste energy pretending it's something else." Daniel smiled, sad and knowing. "You sound like someone who's been disappointed before." "I sound like someone who learned to manage expectations before they manage me," Lena corrected. She finished her wine and set the glass down with careful precision. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Harrington. It was kind. More than kind. But I should go before we both say things we'll regret when reality comes back." "Daniel," he said, "if we're being honest with each other, the least you can do is use my first name." "Daniel," Lena repeated, testing the weight of it. "Thank you, Daniel, for tonight, for seeing me, for making what could have been the worst night of my year into something I'll actually remember fondly." She started to slide out of the booth, but Daniel's voice stopped her. "Wait, please." Lena paused, uncertain. "I know this is going to sound insane," Daniel said, speaking quickly now, like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. "And you have every right to say no. But I'd like to see you again. Not as employer and employee, as people, as—" He gestured between them. "Whatever this is." Lena's heart did something complicated in her chest, equal parts hope and warning. "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because you're you and I'm me. Because there are rules about this kind of thing. Because I need my job and I can't afford to complicate the one stable thing in my life with whatever fantasy you're constructing right now." The words came fast, defensive, protective of a future that already felt fragile. "What if I promise not to make it weird?" Daniel said. "What if we just tried? Saw what happened? No pressure, no expectations, just two people who enjoyed talking to each other, seeing if there's anything worth exploring." "You don't know me," Lena said desperately. "You don't know anything about my life or my problems or the 1,000 ways this could go wrong." "Then tell me," Daniel said simply. "Have coffee with me tomorrow. Tell me about your life. Let me tell you about mine. And if at the end of it you still think I'm crazy, I'll never mention this again. I'll be the invisible employer who walks past you in the hallway, and you'll be the housekeeper I failed to notice. But give me one chance to prove that tonight wasn't an accident." Lena looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past the expensive suit and the privileged confidence to whatever was real underneath. She saw exhaustion that matched her own, loneliness that recognized itself across the careful distance they'd maintained, hope that was just as fragile as hers, just as easily damaged by the wrong word or too much honesty. "One coffee," she heard herself say. "Tomorrow afternoon, somewhere public, somewhere cheap. And if it doesn't work, we both walk away clean." Daniel's face transformed with relief and something that looked dangerously like joy. "Tomorrow afternoon, somewhere public and cheap. I can work with that." He paid the bill while Lena pretended not to notice the total, while she tried not to calculate how many weeks of groceries it represented. When they stood to leave, she felt the eyes of the restaurant tracking their movement, recording this moment for future gossip and speculation. Let them, she thought with sudden defiance. Let them wonder. For tonight, she'd been seen, been valued, been treated like she mattered. Daniel walked her outside, where the valet had already brought his car around, something black and expensive and entirely appropriate to the man who owned half the city. He opened the passenger door for her. "I'll drive you home," he said, and before she could protest, "Please, it's late, and it would make me feel better knowing you got there safely." Lena climbed into leather seats that probably cost more than her entire living room, into a car that smelled like money and possibility. They drove through Los Angeles at night, through streets she'd walked 1,000 times but had never seen from this angle, this height, this comfort. Daniel didn't try to fill the silence with chatter. He just drove, occasionally glancing over at her like he was afraid she might disappear if he looked away too long. When they reached her building, shabby and honest in its poverty, Lena half expected him to recoil, to suddenly realize the vast distance between their worlds. Instead, he put the car in park and turned to face her fully. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saying yes tonight, for being honest with me, for reminding me what it feels like to talk to someone real." "Thank you for dinner," Lena replied, "and for—" She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything the evening had been and hadn't been. "Tomorrow," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow," Lena confirmed, and let herself out of the car before she could change her mind, before reality could catch up with the dream she was allowing herself to believe in. She climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, listening to his car pull away only after her door was safely closed. Inside, surrounded by familiar poverty and the green dress that suddenly felt like evidence of a different life, Lena Morales allowed herself to hope. Just a little. Just enough. Tomorrow she'd probably regret it, but tonight, standing in her tiny kitchen with the taste of lobster ravioli still on her tongue, she let herself imagine that maybe, just maybe, being invisible was a choice she could unmake. That maybe someone seeing her wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of one she'd been too afraid to start writing. Her phone buzzed one final time that night. Not Marcus. Daniel. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., that coffee shop on 5th Street, the one with the chipped mugs and the good bread. I looked it up. See you there." Lena read the message 3 times, searching for the trap, the angle, the inevitable disappointment. She didn't find it. What she found instead was scarier, sincerity, effort. The terrifying possibility that she might actually matter to someone who had no reason to notice her at all. She fell asleep that night still wearing the green dress, too tired to change, too overwhelmed to process everything that had happened. And she dreamed of bakeries and coffee and a man who looked at her like she was worth seeing, like she'd always been worth seeing, like maybe, finally, she'd found someone who understood that invisible didn't mean absent, and silence didn't mean she had nothing to say. Lena woke to sunlight cutting through her apartment's thin curtains and the immediate crushing awareness that last night had actually happened. The green dress lay crumpled on the floor where she'd finally stepped out of it at 3 in the morning, and her phone showed 2 missed calls from Rosa and a text message that made her heart perform an uncomfortable gymnastics routine. "Good morning, still on for 2 p.m., no pressure if you changed your mind. Daniel." She stared at the message for a full minute, searching for subtext, for the catch she knew had to be there. Men like Daniel Harrington didn't genuinely pursue women like her. They didn't remember coffee dates made in the emotional aftermath of expensive dinners. They didn't send good morning texts that acknowledged the possibility of rejection without making it feel like a weapon. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct she'd developed over 26 years of protecting herself screamed that she should cancel, should extract herself from this situation before it evolved into something that could actually hurt. Marcus had been safe in his cruelty because she'd never really believed in him. Daniel was dangerous precisely because some foolish part of her wanted to. "Still on," she typed before she could overthink it. "See you at 2." The response came immediately. "Looking forward to it." 3 words, 12 letters, enough hope to be dangerous. Rosa knocked on her door at 9, letting herself in with the spare key Lena had given her years ago. She found Lena still in bed, staring at her phone like it might explode. "Mija, you didn't come tell me about your date last night." Rosa settled onto the edge of Lena's bed with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd been feeding Lena homemade tamales and unsolicited advice since the day she'd moved in. "Was that boy worth the dress?" "No," Lena said. "He stood me up." Rosa's face transformed into the particular expression of righteous fury that only elderly Mexican women could truly master. "Ese cabrón. I told you he was no good. I told you men who only text are men who don't respect." "I met someone else," Lena interrupted. Rosa's tirade stopped mid-breath. "What?" So Lena told her. Not everything. She left out the part about Daniel being her employer, about the vast financial canyon between their lives. But enough. The restaurant. The dinner. The conversation that had felt real in a way Lena hadn't experienced in years. The coffee date scheduled for this afternoon that might be wonderful, or might be the setup for the worst decision she'd ever made. "And you're going to meet him?" Rosa asked when Lena finished. "I think so. Maybe. I don't know." Lena pulled her blanket tighter around herself. "It's probably stupid. It's definitely stupid. But I said yes, and he seems genuine. Like he actually wants to know me, not just what I can do for him." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. "Your mother, God rest her, she would tell you to be careful, to protect yourself, to remember that some rivers are too deep to cross safely." "I know," Lena said quietly. "But your mother," Rosa continued, "she also spent her whole life being careful, being safe. And she died at 52 having never taken a single risk that mattered, having never let herself want something she wasn't sure she could have." Rosa reached out and took Lena's hand. "Sometimes being careful just means being lonely in a different way. So I should go. I think you should decide what you're more afraid of, getting hurt or never knowing what might have been." Rosa squeezed her hand. "Either way, I'll be here with tamales and terrible advice. Same as always." After Rosa left, Lena stood in front of her closet trying to figure out what you wore to coffee with a billionaire when you were trying to pretend class differences didn't exist. The green dress felt too obvious, too much like she was trying to recreate last night's magic. Her work clothes were out of the question. Everything else she owned existed in the narrow spectrum between too worn and aggressively cheap. She settled finally on jeans that were only slightly faded and a blue sweater Rosa had given her last Christmas. Simple, honest, exactly who she was, someone who couldn't afford to pretend otherwise. The coffee shop Daniel had chosen was one Lena knew well, a neighborhood place that served strong coffee in mismatched mugs and sold day-old pastries at half price to regulars who needed the discount. She arrived 15 minutes early out of anxiety and years of training that being late meant being disrespectful, then immediately regretted it, because now she had to sit and wait and catastrophize about everything that could go wrong. Daniel arrived exactly at 2, and Lena's heart did that stupid jumping thing again when she saw him. He dressed down, jeans and a simple navy sweater that probably still cost more than her monthly rent, but at least didn't announce its expense quite so loudly. He looked younger somehow, less formal, almost nervous as he scanned the coffee shop before his eyes found her. "Hi," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "You came." "You sound surprised," Lena said. "I wasn't sure you would. I thought maybe last night would feel different in daylight, less real, more regrettable." He smiled, self-deprecating. "I've been checking my phone all morning like a teenager waiting to be let down gently." The confession made something in Lena's chest loosen. "I almost canceled 3 times." "What stopped you?" "Stubbornness," Lena admitted, "and my neighbor telling me that being careful and being safe aren't always the same thing." "Your neighbor sounds wise," Daniel said. She She makes excellent tamales, Lena agreed. That helps. A waitress appeared, Carmen, who knew Lena well enough to raise an eyebrow at her companion, but was professional enough not to comment. What can I get you two? Coffee, Lena said. Black. Same, Daniel added, and whatever pastries you have that need eating. When Carmen left, Daniel leaned back in his chair and studied Lena with that same intensity from last night, like he was trying to memorize her features before she disappeared. So, here we are. Here we are, Lena echoed, being awkward in public. Is it awkward? I thought we were doing okay. It's extremely awkward, Lena said, but she was smiling despite herself. I don't know what we're supposed to talk about. I don't know what this is. I don't know if I'm supposed to pretend I don't work for you, or acknowledge it, or Let's acknowledge it, Daniel interrupted gently. Let's acknowledge all of it. That you work in my house, that we're from very different worlds, that this is weird and complicated and probably inadvisable for about 17 different reasons. And then let's decide that none of that matters for the next hour, and we're just two people having coffee. You make it sound simple, Lena said. It is simple. We're making it complicated. Carmen returned with coffee and a plate of pastries that Lena recognized as the ones that would otherwise go stale by closing time. Daniel thanked her with the same genuine warmth he might have shown a five-star server, then pushed the plate toward Lena. You should eat, he said. I saw you eyeing these when you walked in. Lena took a cheese Danish that was only slightly dry and wondered if she was always this transparent or if Daniel was just unusually observant. You're good at noticing things most people miss. Years of practice reading rooms and people, Daniel said. In my line of work, missing details can cost millions. You learn to pay attention. He paused. Though I clearly failed at that particular skill where you're concerned, walking past you for years without really seeing you. Stop apologizing for that, Lena said. Rich people not noticing the help isn't a personal failing. It's standard operating procedure. That doesn't make it acceptable. No, Lena agreed, but it makes it normal. And I learned a long time ago not to take normal personally. Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee mug like he needed the warmth. Tell me something about yourself that I couldn't learn by observation. Something real. Lena considered the request, weighing what felt safe to share against what might be true enough to matter. I'm afraid all the time, she said finally. Of everything. Of being late, of making mistakes, of people seeing how hard I'm working just to stay in place, of wanting things I can't have, and resenting the people who have things they don't want, of becoming so bitter about what I lack that I forget to be grateful for what I have. That's remarkably honest, Daniel said quietly. You asked for real, Lena reminded him. That's what real looks like from where I'm sitting. Fair enough. Daniel took a sip of his coffee. Here's mine. I'm tired of being useful. That's how people value me, by what I can do for them, what doors I can open, what opportunities I can create. My own family treats me like an ATM with a pulse. Business associates treat me like a connection to be leveraged. Even the women I've dated were more interested in the lifestyle than the person providing it. Must be hard, Lena said, and couldn't quite keep the edge from her voice. Being wanted for your money instead of your personality. Daniel's expression shifted. You're right. That was tone deaf. Let me try again. He set down his coffee and leaned forward. What I meant is that I'm lonely in a room full of people who need me. You're lonely because people don't see you at all. Different problems, same result. We're both invisible, just in different ways. Lena wanted to argue, to maintain the defensive distance that had kept her safe, but the truth in his words undermined her resistance. Okay, she admitted. I can see that. So maybe, Daniel continued, we could try being visible to each other, just for a while, just to remember what that feels like. And when reality comes back, Lena asked, when you realize that dating your housekeeper is a PR nightmare, and I realize that dating my employer could cost me the only stable job I have? Then we deal with it like adults, Daniel said. Together, if that's what we want. Separately if it's not. But at least we'll know. At least we'll have tried something real instead of safe. The coffee was good, strong, and bitter, and honest. Exactly what Lena needed. She took a long drink, using the time to organize thoughts that felt chaotic and dangerous. I need you to understand something, she said carefully. I can't afford to lose my job. I can't afford the risk of this going wrong and ending up unemployed because things got weird between us. My entire life is balanced on a financial knife edge, and one wrong move means I'm homeless or worse. I would never, Daniel started. You say that now, Lena interrupted, but people say a lot of things when everything's new and exciting. I need to know that if this doesn't work, if we try and fail, you won't punish me for it. That I'll still have work, still have income, still have the stability I need to survive. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his expression serious. You're right to ask for that assurance. You're right not to trust easy promises. He met her eyes directly. Here's what I can offer. Your job is yours regardless of what happens between us personally. If this works, great. If it doesn't, you remain employed at the same rate, same conditions, same everything. I'll put that in writing if you want it. Why? Lena asked. Why would you put yourself in that position? Why risk the complication? Because you're worth the risk, Daniel said simply. Because last night I had the first genuine conversation I've had in months, maybe years. Because when I'm with you, I don't feel like a resource to be extracted or a status symbol to be displayed. I feel like a person. And that's rare enough to be worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth the complications. Lena felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Hope. Want. The terrible vulnerability of being seen and valued. 1 month, she heard herself say. We try this for 1 month. Real dates, real conversations, real effort from both of us. And at the end, we both get to walk away if it's not working. No hard feelings, no consequences. 1 month, Daniel agreed. Starting now. Starting now, Lena confirmed, and felt like she'd just stepped off a cliff into air that might hold her or might let her fall. They stayed at the coffee shop until Carmen started giving them pointed looks about the evening rush coming in. Daniel told Lena about growing up in Connecticut, about parents who loved each other but had never really liked their only son, about the pressure of inheriting expectations you never asked for. Lena told him about her mother, who died when Lena was 19, leaving her alone with debt and grief and no clear path forward. She worked 3 jobs, Lena said, shredding a napkin without realizing it. Cleaning offices at night, retail during the day, catering on weekends. She was always tired, always worried, always one emergency away from losing everything. And then she had a stroke at the grocery store, and I found out she'd let her health insurance lapse because she couldn't afford the premiums. I'm sorry, Daniel said, and it sounded genuine rather than reflexive. The worst part is I'm becoming her, Lena continued. Same jobs, same worries, same exhaustion. I swore I'd do better, be smarter, find a way out. But here I am at 26, following the exact same path, making the exact same choices because they're the only ones available. You're not her, Daniel said firmly. You're aware of the pattern. That's the first step to changing it. Awareness doesn't pay bills, Lena reminded him. No, Daniel agreed, but it creates possibility. It lets you see opportunities when they appear instead of walking past them, because you're too tired or too scared or too convinced they're not meant for you. They left the coffee shop as evening settled over Los Angeles, turning the sky purple and gold. Daniel walked Lena to the bus stop, ignoring her protest that he didn't need to wait with her. I want to, he said. Let me have this. So they stood together as traffic rushed past and the city transformed from day to night, and when Lena's bus appeared, Daniel did something unexpected. He took her hand, brief and gentle, a question rather than a demand. Tomorrow? He asked. I work tomorrow, Lena said. At your house, actually. How's that going to work? Daniel's smile was slightly mischievous. I'll be at the office all day. But maybe dinner tomorrow night? Somewhere less expensive than La Lumiere, somewhere we can actually talk without people taking photos. Somewhere in my price range? Lena challenged. Somewhere in our price range, Daniel corrected. This is a partnership, remember? We split things. Equal investment, equal risk. The bus doors hissed open. Lena squeezed his hand once and let go. Text me the details. She found a seat by the window and watched him watch her leave, and felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. The sweet, terrible anticipation of something that might actually matter. The next day, cleaning Daniel's house felt surreal. Lena moved through rooms she'd cleaned 100 times before, but everything looked different now. The bedroom where she changed his sheets held new significance. The kitchen where she'd never seen him cook became a place of possibility. The study where he worked late into the night became intimate rather than impersonal. She was wiping down the bathroom counter when she noticed a note on the mirror, written on expensive stationery in confident handwriting. Lena, thank you for yesterday. Thank you for taking a chance. Dinner tonight at 7? There's a taco place on 6th Street that Rosa told me is acceptable. I may have bribed her with an offer to fix her apartment's heater. See you tonight. D. Lena read it 3 times, equal parts charmed and horrified. He'd contacted Rosa. He'd offered to fix her heater, something their slumlord had been promising for 2 years. He was trying, genuinely trying, and that was more terrifying than any expensive restaurant or grand gesture. She texted him from his own bathroom, feeling the absurdity of the situation. You bribed my neighbor? The response came quickly. I prefer to think of it as community investment. She's cold. I know people who fix heaters. Everyone wins. This is weird. Extremely weird. Still on for tonight? Lena looked at herself in Daniel's mirror, saw a woman who was tired and scared and inexplicably hopeful, and made a choice. 7 p.m. Don't be late. That evening, Rosa's heater worked for the first time in 2 years, and Lena found herself at a taco stand wearing the same blue sweater and less anxiety than she'd expected. Daniel arrived in jeans and a t-shirt that made him look younger, more approachable, less like the man who owned half the city. They ate tacos that dripped salsa and were absolutely perfect, sitting on plastic chairs under string lights that had seen better days. Daniel told her about a deal that had fallen through, about the satisfaction of occasionally failing at something that didn't actually matter. Lena told him about the elderly woman on her route who'd invited her to church and wouldn't take no for an answer, about learning to accept kindness even when it came wrapped in expectations. Do you go? Daniel asked. To church? Sometimes, Lena admitted. Not because I'm particularly religious, but because Mrs. Patterson makes excellent coffee cake and gets lonely on Sundays. It's easier to go than to explain why I don't. That's kind of you, Daniel said. It's self-serving, Lena corrected. Her coffee cake is really good. Daniel laughed, genuine and surprised, and Lena felt something shift between them, a relaxation of the careful distance they'd been maintaining, a permission to be themselves without performance. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a pattern. Daniel would text her in the mornings, nothing elaborate, just small observations or questions that made her smile. They'd meet for coffee or cheap meals, always somewhere in Lena's neighborhood, always somewhere that didn't require her to dress up or pretend to be someone she wasn't. He asked about her work, about Rosa, about the bakery dreams she'd mentioned that first night. She asked about his family, his business, the weight of running an empire he'd never really wanted. My father built the company from nothing, Daniel told her over Vietnamese food, that cost less than $10 and was better than anything Lena had ever tasted. He started with one apartment building and turned it into a real estate empire. And then he died and left it all to me, along with a board of directors who think I'm too soft, a mother who thinks I'm ungrateful, and a sister who thinks I stole her inheritance. Did you? Lena asked. Want it, I mean? I wanted to make him proud, Daniel said quietly. I wanted him to look at me once, just once, and see something worth approving of. But he died before that happened, and now I'm stuck running a company I don't particularly care about, trying to honor a man who never liked me very much. That's sad, Lena said. It's pathetic, Daniel corrected. No, Lena disagreed. It's human. It's wanting approval from someone who withheld it. That's not pathetic. It's just painful. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that had become more natural over the past 2 weeks. How did you get so wise? Poverty, Lena said dryly. It's very educational. On their 3rd week, Daniel asked if he could take her somewhere special, somewhere that required the green dress and a level of trust Lena wasn't sure she'd rebuilt since Marcus. Where? She asked suspiciously. My family's having a charity gala, Daniel said. Big donors, important people, the kind of event I usually hate. But I thought, if you wanted, you could come with me. As my date. Officially. Lena's stomach dropped. That's a terrible idea. Probably, Daniel agreed. But I'm tired of hiding. Tired of pretending that what we're building doesn't matter just because other people might judge it. Daniel, your family will eat me alive. I clean houses for a living. I don't know which fork to use or how to make small talk about stock portfolios. I'll embarrass you. You couldn't embarrass me if you tried, Daniel said firmly. But I won't pressure you. If you're not ready, if it feels like too much too fast, we can keep doing this. Quiet dinners, coffee shop conversations. Just us. I just wanted you to know that I'm ready for more. That I want people to know you matter to me. Lena thought about it for 2 days, weighing pride against fear, desire against practicality. She talked to Rosa, who told her to wear the green dress and remember that rich people were just poor people with better lawyers. She almost called it off a dozen times, but on Saturday night, she put on the green dress and the borrowed earrings and let Daniel pick her up in his expensive car and tried to believe that she deserved to be seen in the same way he seemed determined to see her. The gala was everything she'd feared. Chandeliers and champagne, designer gowns and practiced laughter, people whose casual jewelry cost more than Lena would make in a lifetime. Daniel stayed close to her, introducing her simply as Lena, never explaining, never apologizing, just presenting her as someone who belonged. The stares started immediately. Lena felt them like physical weight. The assessment, the judgment, the barely concealed curiosity about who she was and why she was there. Daniel's hand found the small of her back, steady and reassuring. "Breathe," he murmured. "You're doing great." "I'm drowning," Lena whispered back. "Then drown magnificently," Daniel said. "Show them you're not afraid." But she was afraid. Terrified, actually, of being exposed as the fraud she felt like, of confirming every assumption these people were already making. When a woman in diamonds approached them with a predatory smile, Lena wanted to run. "Daniel, darling," the woman said, kissing the air near his cheeks. "How lovely to see you. And who is this?" "This is Lena," Daniel said. "Lena, this is Catherine Westbrook. She sits on our board." Catherine's eyes swept over Lena with surgical precision, cataloging every detail of her discount dress and borrowed accessories. "Charming," she said, in a tone that made the word an insult. "How did you two meet?" The silence stretched too long. Lena could feel Daniel tensing beside her, could sense him calculating the best response. But she was tired of hiding, tired of being ashamed of who she was and where she came from. "I clean Daniel's house," she said clearly. "Have for about 3 years now." Catherine's expression flickered with something that might have been shock or might have been delight at having her suspicions confirmed. "How progressive of you, Daniel. I'm sure the media will find this absolutely fascinating." "I'm sure they will," Daniel said evenly. "If you'll excuse us, Catherine." He guided Lena away before she could respond, before she could process the threat Catherine had just delivered with practiced elegance. They found a quiet corner near the bar, and Daniel ordered her something expensive that Lena didn't want. "I shouldn't have said that," she said miserably. "I should have lied or deflected or—" "You should have done exactly what you did," Daniel interrupted, "told the truth, refused to be ashamed. That took more courage than anything else that's happening in this room tonight." "She's going to tell everyone," Lena said. "Probably," Daniel agreed. "And they're all going to have opinions about it, about us, about whether this is appropriate or scandalous, or whatever other judgment makes them feel superior. But here's the thing, Lena, I don't care. I don't care what Catherine Westbrook thinks or what the board thinks or what anyone in this room thinks. I care what you think. I care whether you're okay, whether this is what you want, whether being here with me is worth whatever consequences come next." Lena looked up at him, at this man who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd chosen her when she was convinced she'd never be worth choosing. "I don't know if I'm brave enough for this," she admitted. "You're the bravest person I know," Daniel said. "You show up every day to a life that's exhausting and unfair and relentlessly difficult, and you do it with grace and humor and without becoming bitter. That's not weakness, Lena. That's strength I've never had to develop because I've never had to survive the way you survive." Before she could respond, a new voice cut through their moment. "Well, this is interesting." Lena turned to find a woman who looked enough like Daniel to obviously be related. Same dark hair, same sharp features, though arranged in an expression of calculated coldness that Daniel had never shown. Diana. Daniel said, his tone carefully neutral. This is Lena, my sister Diana. Diana's smile was all edges. The housekeeper. Yes, Catherine was just filling me in. How very pretty woman of you, brother. Diana, Daniel warned. What? Diana's eyes were bright with malice. I think it's sweet, very democratic, very modern. I'm sure Mother will be absolutely thrilled when she finds out you're dating the help. That's enough, Daniel said, his voice hard. But Diana wasn't finished. She turned to Lena directly, her expression shifting into something that might have been pity if it weren't quite so cruel. I hope he's paying you well for this performance, sweetie, because once the novelty wears off, once his friends start asking uncomfortable questions and the tabloids start digging into your background, he'll drop you faster than bad stock. That's what men like my brother do. They slum for a while, then they come back to their own kind. Don't get too comfortable. The words landed like physical blows. Lena felt her carefully constructed composure cracking, felt the truth of Diana's accusations working their way under her skin. This was what she'd feared from the beginning, the confirmation that she was temporary, disposable, a distraction rather than a destination. You don't know what you're talking about, Daniel said, but Diana had already walked away, her point made and her damage done. Lena turned to Daniel, searching his face for denial, for reassurance, for anything that might contradict what his sister had just said. What she saw instead was guilt. She's wrong, Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is she? Lena asked quietly. Because, from where I'm standing, this feels a lot like a social experiment. Rich guy dates poor girl, sees how the other half lives, gets his perspective expanded and his conscience cleared, then goes back to women who know which fork to use. That's not what this is, Daniel insisted. Then what is it? Lena demanded. Because I need to know, Daniel. I need to know if I'm a person to you or a project. If this is real or if I'm just the most interesting thing that's happened to you in a while. Daniel reached for her hands, but she pulled back. Lena, please. You matter to me. This matters. Whatever Diana said, whatever poison she tried to plant, it's not true. I'm not playing games with you. But she is right about one thing, Lena said, and felt something breaking in her chest. Eventually, this becomes real. Eventually, you have to choose between me and your world. And when that happens, when you're bored or your family or your business interests make you pick, who do you honestly think you're going to choose? You, Daniel said without hesitation. I choose you. You say that now, Lena said. But Diana's right. I've seen this story before. I've been the temporary girl, the interesting distraction, the one who gets left behind when reality comes calling. And Daniel, I can't do that again. I can't invest everything I have in someone who's going to realize I'm not worth the trouble. You are worth the trouble, Daniel said desperately. You're worth everything. Please don't let her words destroy what we're building. But Lena was already backing away, already retreating into the protective shell that had kept her safe before she'd been stupid enough to hope. I need to leave. Then I'm coming with you, Daniel said. No. The word came out harder than she'd intended. You stay. This is your world, your event, your responsibility. I'm just going to go home and remember why I don't belong in places like this. She left before he could stop her, before the tears that were threatening could actually fall, before anyone could see the housekeeper fleeing the ball like some tragic fairy tale in reverse. The valet looked confused when she asked for Daniel's car, then relieved when she clarified she just needed a taxi. The ride home was long and expensive and worth every penny to be alone with her humiliation. By the time she reached her apartment, her phone showed 6 missed calls from Daniel and a string of texts that oscillated between apology and frustration. Please call me. Let me explain. Diana was trying to hurt both of us. Don't let her win. I meant what I said. You matter. This matters. I'm coming over. The last message had been sent 10 minutes ago. Lena looked out her window and saw Daniel's car pulling up to her building, saw him getting out in his tuxedo like he hadn't just left his own family's gala early. He knocked on her door 3 minutes later. Lena opened it because she owed him that much, because they needed to end this properly before it became something even more complicated. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I'm sorry I brought you there. Sorry I exposed you to my family's particular brand of cruelty. Sorry I put you in a position where you had to defend yourself against people who aren't worth the effort. It's not your fault your sister is awful, Lena said tiredly. It's my fault I didn't prepare you better, didn't warn you that my family would see you as a threat rather than a person. Daniel stepped inside when she moved back, closing the door behind him. But she was wrong, Lena, about all of it. This isn't a game. You're not a distraction, and I'm not going to wake up one day and decide you're not worth the complication. You don't know that, Lena said. You can't promise that. No, Daniel agreed. I can't promise I'll never disappoint you or hurt you or fail to be what you need. But I can promise that my feelings are real. That what we've built over these past weeks matters more to me than anything Catherine or Diana or anyone else in that room tonight represents. Lena sank onto her worn couch, suddenly exhausted. This is too hard, Daniel. I'm not strong enough for this. Daniel sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. You're the strongest person I know. Stop saying that, Lena said. I'm not strong. I'm just tired. Tired of fighting for every scrap of dignity, every moment of happiness, every chance to be seen as something other than invisible or temporary or convenient. Then let me fight with you, Daniel said quietly. Not for you. With you. As partners. As equals who are choosing each other despite everything and everyone telling us it's impossible. Lena wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. But belief required trust. And trust required vulnerability. And vulnerability had only ever led to disappointment. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I, Daniel admitted. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we figure it out together, one day at a time, one choice at a time. He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. His grip was warm and solid and real, an anchor in a moment that felt like it might sweep her away. 1 month, Lena said. You said 1 month. We've got 2 weeks left, Daniel confirmed. What happens then? We decide if this is worth extending, Daniel said. Both of us. Equal voice, equal choice. And if you decide it's not, if the pain outweighs the joy or the risk outweighs the reward, I'll respect that. But please don't decide tonight based on Diana's cruelty. Give us the full month we promised each other. Lena closed her eyes and tried to imagine 2 more weeks of this, the hope and fear, the possibility and doubt, the constant calibration of whether she was worth the trouble she was causing. It sounded exhausting. It also sounded better than going back to invisibility. Okay, she said finally. 2 more weeks. But Daniel, I need you to be honest with me about everything, about what your family says, what your board thinks, what this costs you in ways I can't see. I need to know what I'm asking you to risk. Deal, Daniel said, but you have to do the same. Tell me when it's too much, when I'm asking too much, when you need me to slow down or back off, or fight harder. Partnership goes both ways. They sat together on Lena's cheap couch in her tiny apartment that smelled like Rose's cooking and old carpet, and Lena felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the possibility of hope, maybe the permission to try. Stay, she said impulsively. I don't mean stay, just don't go back to that gala. Don't leave me alone with my thoughts tonight. Daniel smiled, tired but genuine. I'd like that. So they stayed. They ordered pizza that cost less than the appetizers at the gala. They talked until Lena's voice was hoarse. And when Daniel finally left, hours later with dawn threatening the horizon, he kissed her forehead with a tenderness that made Lena's heart perform acrobatics she wasn't ready to acknowledge. 2 weeks, he reminded her. 2 weeks, she confirmed. After he left, Lena lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time she'd felt this terrified and this hopeful simultaneously. She came up empty. This was new territory, uncharted and dangerous, and she had no idea if she was brave enough to see it through to whatever ending waited. But for tonight, for 2 more weeks, she was willing to try. The photograph appeared 3 days later on a gossip website Lena had never heard of, but apparently everyone else in Los Angeles read religiously. Someone had captured the moment at the gala when Daniel had his hand on her back, when they'd been looking at each other with an intimacy that was impossible to mistake for anything other than what it was. The headline read, "Billionaire Developer Daniel Harrington's Mystery Woman, From Mansion to Romance?" Rosa showed it to her over morning coffee, her expression hovering between concern and something that might have been pride. "Mija, you're famous." Lena stared at the screen, at her own face looking nervous and out of place among all that wealth. At Daniel, looking at her like she was the only person in the room. The comments section was exactly what she'd expected. Speculation about whether she was a gold digger, whether this was a publicity stunt, whether Daniel had lost his mind. Someone had already identified her as an employee of the cleaning service that maintained his house. The word inappropriate appeared 17 times in the first 50 comments alone. "This is bad," Lena said quietly. "This is people with too much time and not enough joy in their own lives," Rosa corrected. "Ignore them." But ignoring them became impossible when Lena's phone started ringing with numbers she didn't recognize, when reporters somehow got her address and started leaving business cards under her door, when her supervisor at the cleaning company called and asked if they needed to discuss the situation with one of their clients. The implication was clear. Lena's personal life was becoming a professional liability. Daniel called that afternoon, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I'm handling it. My PR team is working on a statement. This will blow over." "Your PR team," Lena repeated. "You have a team dedicated to managing public perception of your life." "It's part of being in the public eye," Daniel said. "I know it's invasive. I know it's not what you signed up for. But we'll get through this." "Will we?" Lena asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, this is just the beginning. They found out where I work, Daniel. They know I clean houses. By tomorrow, they'll probably have my entire employment history, my credit score, every mistake I've ever made. And they'll use all of it to prove that I'm exactly what they think I am, someone who doesn't belong in your world." "You belong anywhere you choose to be," Daniel said firmly. "Don't let them take that from you." But they already had. Lena felt it in the way her coworkers looked at her differently now. In the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, in the weight of being visible in all the wrong ways. She'd spent years cultivating invisibility as protection, and now it had been stripped away by a single photograph and the cruel curiosity of strangers who had opinions about her life without knowing a single true thing about her. That evening, Daniel showed up at her apartment unannounced, his expression grim. "We need to talk." Lena let him in, her stomach already knotting with anxiety. "That's never a good opening." "The board called an emergency meeting," Daniel said without preamble. "About us. About whether my personal life represents a conflict of interest or a reputation liability for the company." "What did you tell them?" Lena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "I told them my personal life was none of their business," Daniel said. "I told them that who I choose to date has no bearing on my ability to run the company. And I told them that if they had a problem with it, they could find a new CEO. Lena's breath caught. "You didn't." "I did," Daniel confirmed. "Because I'm not going to let a group of men in expensive suits dictate my life anymore. I've spent years trying to be what my father wanted, what the company needed, what everyone expected. And I'm done, Lena. I'm done pretending that any of it matters more than being with someone who actually sees me." "Daniel, you can't just walk away from your company," Lena said, panic rising in her chest. "You can't throw away everything you've built because of me." "I'm not throwing it away," Daniel said. "I'm choosing what matters. There's a difference." "Is there?" Lena asked. "Because it sounds like you're making a grand gesture that you'll regret in 6 months when the reality of what you've given up actually hits you. And then where will we be? You'll resent me for costing you your empire, and I'll hate myself for letting you make that choice." Daniel crossed the small space between them and took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. Really listen. I don't want the company. I've never wanted it. I took it because my father died and it was expected, because saying no felt like dishonoring his memory. But running a real estate empire doesn't make me happy. It makes me tired and cynical and disconnected from anything that feels real. You know what makes me happy? Coffee shop conversations, cheap tacos, watching you discover you like lobster ravioli. That's what I want more of, not board meetings and shareholder calls and pretending to care about profit margins." "You're romanticizing poverty," Lena said, pulling back from his touch. You have no idea what it's actually like to not have money, to wake up every day worried about rent and groceries and whether your car will start. It's not noble or character building or somehow more authentic than your life. It's exhausting and scary and relentlessly hard, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, especially not someone who's choosing it as some kind of statement about what matters. I'm not romanticizing anything, Daniel said. I'm just trying to choose a life that feels like mine instead of one I inherited. And yes, I know I have the privilege of choice in a way you never have. I know that walking away from money is different when you've always had it, but that doesn't make the choice less real or the desire less genuine. Lena sank onto her couch, her head in her hands. This is moving too fast. We've known each other for 3 weeks, Daniel. 3 weeks. And you're already talking about walking away from your entire life. That's not romance. That's instability. Or maybe it's the first stable thing I've done in years, Daniel countered. Maybe staying in a life I hate is the unstable choice. And this, you, us, is the first thing that's felt solid and real and worth fighting for. Before Lena could respond, her phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Is this Lena Morales? A woman's voice, professional and cool. Yes. Who is this? My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a reporter with the Los Angeles Times. I'm working on a story about Daniel Harrington's relationship with you, and I was hoping you might be willing to comment. Lena's blood went cold. No comment. I understand this must be overwhelming, Jennifer continued, her tone shifting into practiced sympathy. But I want to make sure your side of the story gets told. Right now, the narrative is being controlled by people who don't know you, who are making assumptions about who you are and what your motivations might be. This is your chance to set the record straight. I said no comment, Lena repeated, and hung up. Daniel was watching her with concern. Reporter? Los Angeles Times, Lena confirmed, wanting my side of the story. My side, she repeated bitterly. Like there are sides to this. Like we're in some kind of war instead of just two people trying to have a relationship. It's going to get worse before it gets better, Daniel said quietly. I need you to know that. The media attention, the scrutiny, the people who will try to find dirt on you or manufacture it if they can't. This is what dating someone like me means, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry you have to deal with consequences you never asked for. Lena looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past the romantic declarations and grand gestures to the practical reality of what he was offering. What if I can't handle it? She asked. What if this level of attention, this constant judgment, what if it breaks me? Then we stop, Daniel said simply. We go back to our separate lives, and I make sure you're protected from any fallout. But Lena, I don't think you give yourself enough credit. You've survived things that would have broken most people. You're stronger than you think. Or maybe I'm just tired, Lena said. Maybe survival isn't the same as strength. Maybe I've just gotten good at enduring things that hurt. Daniel sat beside her, close but not touching. What do you want? Not what you think you should want. Not what makes practical sense. What does your heart actually want? The question was impossibly hard because Lena had spent years training herself not to listen to her heart, not to trust wants that led to disappointment. But sitting here in her tiny apartment with a man who just threatened to walk away from a fortune for her, she couldn't deny what she felt. I want this to work, she admitted. I want to believe that we can build something real despite everything working against us. I want to stop being afraid that the other shoe is about to drop. I want... Her voice broke. I want to matter to someone the way you seem to think I matter to you. You do matter, Daniel said. You matter so much it scares me. Because I've never felt this way about anyone, and I have no idea how to protect it or nurture it or keep it from being destroyed by external pressure. All I know is that walking away from you feels worse than any consequence the board or the media or my family could threaten me with. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their confession settling between them like something fragile and precious. Finally, Lena spoke. 2 weeks, she said. We had 2 weeks left on our trial. Let's see them through. No grand gestures, no quitting your job, no dramatic statements to the press. Just us, figuring out if this can survive reality. Okay, Daniel agreed. 2 weeks, and then we decide together. But reality had other plans. The next morning, Lena woke to find her supervisor's number lighting up her phone. When she answered, the conversation was brief and brutal. Lena, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to let you go from the Harrington account. The client requested it specifically. Lena's stomach dropped. Daniel requested that I be removed? No, her supervisor said quickly. His mother did. She's technically the property owner, and she called personally to say she no longer feels comfortable with you having access to the house. Given the circumstances, we have to honor that request. What circumstances? Lena demanded, though she already knew. The media attention, the relationship. Look, Lena, you're a great employee, but we can't afford the liability of having our staff involved in personal relationships with clients. It's a conflict of interest. I'm being punished for dating someone, Lena said flatly. You're being reassigned, her supervisor corrected. We'll find you other houses, other clients, but the Harrington account is closed to you effective immediately. After she hung up, Lena sat on her bed and stared at the wall, trying to process the loss. It wasn't just about the money, though losing one of her highest-paying accounts hurt. It was about the principle. Being removed from her job because Daniel's mother had decided Lena wasn't appropriate, wasn't worthy, wasn't the right kind of person to be trusted in their home now that she dared to be visible. When she told Daniel, his reaction was immediate and volcanic. She had no right. I'm calling her right now. Don't, Lena said. It'll just make things worse. It can't get worse, Daniel argued. She's actively sabotaging your employment because she doesn't approve of our relationship. That's not acceptable. It's her house, Lena said tiredly. She has every right to decide who works there. It's my house, Daniel corrected. She gave it to me 5 years ago for tax purposes. I'm the legal owner. And I want you to know that this isn't over. I'm going to fix this. Please don't, Lena said. I don't want to be a problem you need to solve. I don't want to be the reason you're fighting with your family. You're not a problem, Daniel said firmly. My mother's prejudice is the problem. Her inability to see you as a person instead of a class designation is the problem. And I'll be damned if I let her punish you for my choices. But the damage was done. Over the next few days, the situation escalated in ways Lena couldn't have predicted. A tabloid published a story claiming she'd deliberately targeted Daniel, that she'd used her access to his home to seduce him in some calculated scheme to escape poverty. Another outlet ran a piece questioning whether their relationship constituted workplace harassment, positioning Daniel as the powerful employer taking advantage of vulnerable staff. The irony wasn't lost on Lena that she was simultaneously being painted as both predator and victim, neither characterization bearing any resemblance to reality. The truth, that they had met accidentally, that the attraction had been mutual and gradual, that she'd resisted as much as she'd surrendered, was too complicated and too boring for headlines. Her phone never stopped ringing. Reporters camped outside her building. Someone posted her address online, and she started getting hate mail from strangers who felt entitled to opinions about her life. The cleaning company, overwhelmed by media requests and concerned about their reputation, put her on unpaid leave until things settled down. This is unsustainable, Lena told Daniel when he came over on the 5th night of media siege. I can't work. I can't leave my apartment without cameras. I can't have a normal conversation with anyone without them asking about you. This isn't a relationship. It's a circus, and I'm the performing animal. Come stay with me, Daniel said. My building has security. They won't let reporters pass the lobby. You'll be safe there. Safe from cameras, Lena said. Not safe from what moving in with you would mean. Every headline would be proved right. Poor girl lands rich boyfriend, moves into his penthouse, becomes exactly the gold digger they already think she is. I don't care what they think, Daniel said. But I do, Lena shot back. Because when this ends, and Daniel, we both know there's a real possibility it ends. I have to go back to my life. I have to find work, rebuild my reputation, survive in a city that will remember me as the housekeeper who tried to sleep her way into wealth and failed. You get to go back to your empire and your privilege and your life that exists separate from all this. I don't have that option. It doesn't have to end, Daniel said desperately. We can make this work if we're both willing to fight for it. I am fighting for it, Lena said, her voice breaking. But I'm also drowning, and I don't know how much longer I can keep my head above water. The breaking point came 3 days later, when Lena's landlord called to inform her that someone had offered him triple the market rate to break her lease. The message was clear. There were people with resources willing to pay to make her life impossible, to drive her away from Daniel through financial pressure and orchestrated hardship. Who would do that? Lena asked Daniel when she told him. My family, Daniel said grimly, or the board, or both working together. They want you gone, and they're not subtle about their methods. This is insane, Lena said. This level of interference, this determination to control your life, how did you live like this? I didn't, Daniel admitted. I just endured. Followed the path they laid out, made the choices they approved of, dated women from appropriate families who understood the rules of engagement. It was empty and miserable, but at least it was predictable. You're the first thing I've chosen for myself in years, and they can't tolerate that level of independence. Lena felt something crystallizing in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite resignation, something harder and more clarifying. I need you to be honest with me about something. Anything, Daniel said. If you had to choose right now, today, between me and everything else, your company, your family, your entire life as you know it, what would you choose? Daniel didn't hesitate. You. I'd choose you. Why? Lena demanded. We've known each other for 3 weeks, Daniel. 3 weeks of coffee dates and dinner conversations and one disastrous gala. That's not enough time to make life-altering decisions. That's not enough foundation to justify throwing away everything you've ever known. It's enough to know what I don't want anymore, Daniel said quietly. And I don't want a life where my value is measured in profit margins and stock prices. I don't want relationships that are strategic alliances instead of genuine connections. I don't want to wake up at 50 and realize I spent my entire life doing what was expected instead of what mattered. What if I'm not what matters? Lena asked. What if I'm just what's available, what's convenient, what represents everything you think you want because it's different from what you have? You're not convenient, Daniel said with a slight laugh. You're possibly the least convenient thing that's ever happened to me. Dating you has cost me professional credibility, family relationships, and my peace of mind. But it's also the first time I've felt like myself in years. The first time I've had conversations that challenge me instead of just confirming what I already think. The first time I've looked forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it. Lena wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly that it physically hurt. This desire to accept that she could be worth the chaos she was causing, worth the sacrifice he was offering. But practical Lena, survival Lena, the part of her that had learned to protect herself through years of disappointment, couldn't silence the warnings. I think you need to actually do it, she said finally. I think you need to choose. Not theoretically, not in the abstract. Actually make the choice and live with the consequences, and then see if you still feel the same way. What are you saying? Daniel asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. I'm saying I need space, Lena said. I need you to figure out what your life looks like without the company, without your family's approval, without all the things you think you're ready to give up. And I need to figure out if I can handle being the reason you gave them up, if I can live with that weight. You're breaking up with me, Daniel said flatly. I'm asking for a pause, Lena corrected. 2 weeks. The same amount of time we had left anyway. You deal with your board, your family, your life. I'll deal with the reporters and the job search and figuring out where I'm going to live now that my landlord wants me gone. And at the end of it, we'll both know if this is real or if it was just a beautiful disaster we both needed to experience to learn something about ourselves. I don't need 2 weeks to know what I want, Daniel said. Maybe not, Lena agreed, but I do. I need to know that I'm choosing you for the right reasons. Not because I'm scared and alone and you represent safety. Not because the attention feels good after years of invisibility. Not because I've romanticized what being with you means. I need to choose you clearly, consciously, with my eyes open to all the complications. And I can't do that while I'm in survival mode. Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, to convince her this was a mistake, to promise her things he couldn't guarantee. But instead, he just nodded, his expression devastating in its defeat. 2 weeks, he said. But Lena, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't disappear on me completely. One text a day just so I know you're okay. That's all I'm asking. Lena considered this, weighing independence against cruelty. Okay, one text a day. Daniel stood to leave, and Lena felt something tearing in her chest, this horrible sensation that she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the smartest decision, or possibly both simultaneously. At the door, he turned back. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you're not a disaster. You're not a problem. You're the best thing that's happened to me in years. And if these 2 weeks teach me anything, I already know what it'll be. That I'd rather have a complicated life with you than an easy life without you. After he left, Lena allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry. Then she pulled herself together and started making lists. Find a new apartment, update her resume, contact the cleaning company about returning to work, figure out how to rebuild a life that had been dismantled by 3 weeks of hope and the cruel machinery of wealth protecting its own. The next morning, she woke to a text from Daniel. Just 3 words, sent at 6 a.m. I miss you. Lena stared at the message for a long time before responding with equal simplicity. Miss you too. The 2 weeks that followed were among the hardest of Lena's life. Without Daniel's presence as a distraction, she had to confront the full reality of her situation. She was unemployed, about to be homeless, and internet famous for all the wrong reasons. Job applications went unanswered, presumably because potential employers Googled her name and decided the publicity wasn't worth the risk. The cleaning company officially terminated her employment, citing irreconcilable circumstances. Her savings, never substantial to begin with, dwindled at an alarming rate. Rosa helped where she could, bringing food and refusing to let Lena sink into complete despair. You're not giving up, she said firmly when Lena suggested maybe she should just leave Los Angeles entirely. You're figuring things out. There's a difference. Through it all, Lena and Daniel maintained their one text-a-day agreement. Sometimes the messages were simple status updates. Sometimes they were confessions that neither of them knew how to say in person. The texts became a lifeline, a reminder that even in separation, they were choosing to stay connected. Had a board meeting today, told them I'm stepping down as CEO. Surprisingly liberating. Lost another job opportunity. Apparently I'm unhireable now, less liberating, more terrifying. My mother called. We had it out. I told her you're not the problem. Her prejudice is. She hung up on me. Rosa made tamales, shared them with the reporter camped outside. He left. Apparently kindness defeats persistence. I miss you became a recurring theme, sent from both phones at various times of day and night. On day 12, Daniel sent a longer message than usual. I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing, about making it real instead of theoretical. I met with the board yesterday and officially resigned as CEO. I'm selling my shares in the company. It'll take time, but I'm done with that life. I'm also looking at teaching positions at universities. Turns out having a degree in architecture and years of development experience makes you moderately qualified to educate others. Who knew? I'm not telling you this to pressure you or prove anything. I just wanted you to know that the choice has been made and it feels right. Whatever happens with us, this needed to happen for me. You helped me see that. Lena read the message 5 times, trying to process what it meant. Daniel was actually doing it, walking away from the empire, choosing a different path, making real the theoretical sacrifice they'd discussed. It should have felt romantic, validating, like proof of his commitment. Instead, it felt heavy with responsibility. She called him, breaking their text-only rule. You actually did it, she said when he answered. I did, Daniel confirmed. And before you start worrying that you're responsible for my choices, let me be clear. This was my decision. Mine alone. You were the catalyst, but the dissatisfaction has been building for years. You just gave me permission to finally do something about it. What if you regret it? Lena asked. What if I don't? Daniel countered. What if this is the first honest choice I've made in a decade? What if walking away from money I never earned gives me back something more valuable? Agency over my own life? You sound different, Lena observed. I feel different, Daniel admitted. Lighter, freer, terrified, but in a good way. Like I'm finally writing my own story instead of living in someone else's expectations. They talked for an hour, the longest conversation they'd had since the separation started. Daniel told her about his family's reaction, his mother's fury, his sister's smug satisfaction, the board's barely concealed relief. Lena told him about her job search struggles, about the small apartment she'd found in a neighborhood that wasn't great but was affordable, about slowly rebuilding from the ruins of the past month. 2 more days, Daniel said as the call was winding down. Then we decide. Then we decide, Lena agreed and felt her heart rate accelerate with anxiety and anticipation in equal measure. On day 14, Lena woke to a knock on her door. She opened it to find Daniel standing there with coffee and pastries from the shop where they'd had their second date. "I know we said 2 weeks," he said, "but I couldn't wait until midnight for some arbitrary deadline. I needed to see you. Needed to tell you face to face that I'm in, Lena. Completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably in. I love you. I think I've loved you since that first dinner when you told me the truth about being tired instead of giving me some polite fiction. And I know 2 weeks isn't enough time to completely figure out our lives, but it's enough time to know that I want to figure them out together." Lena stood frozen in her doorway, coffee and pastries extended toward her like an offering, Daniel's confession hanging in the air between them. She'd spent 2 weeks trying to be practical, trying to protect herself, trying to make the smart choice that would keep her safe from disappointment. But looking at Daniel now, tired, sincere, offering her cheap coffee and vulnerability in equal measure, Lena realized that safety had never been what she actually wanted. She wanted this. She wanted messy and complicated and uncertain if it meant being with someone who saw her, who chose her, who was willing to rebuild his entire life for the possibility of building a new one together. "I love you too," she said, and watched his face transform with relief and joy. "And I'm terrified. And I have no idea how we make this work. And I'm still unemployed and about to be homeless and possibly the most inconvenient person you could have fallen for. But I'm in. If you're willing to figure it out together, so am I." Daniel set down his coffee and pastries and pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home after being lost for longer than she'd realized. They stood there in her doorway, holding each other while the morning sun turned the sky pink and gold. And Lena let herself believe, really believe, that maybe invisible wasn't permanent, that maybe being seen was worth the risk of being hurt. "So what now?" she asked against his shoulder. "Now," Daniel said, "we start building something new, together. No grand gestures, no dramatic statements, just 2 people choosing each other every day and figuring out the details as we go." "That sounds impossibly hard," Lena said. "Probably," Daniel agreed, "but also worth it. You're worth it." And standing there in the doorway of an apartment she was about to lose, holding on to a man who'd given up an empire for the chance to know her, Lena finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was. They spent the rest of that morning in Lena's apartment, drinking coffee that had gone cold and eating pastries while mapping out a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. Daniel had already started the process of liquidating his assets, converting his stake in the family company into liquid capital that would fund whatever came next. Lena had exactly $743 in her bank account and a week before her lease expired. The gap between their financial realities remained vast, but at least now they were facing it together. "I don't want your money," Lena said for what felt like the 100th time. "I need you to understand that. Whatever we build, I need to contribute equally, or this will never feel like ours." "I understand pride," Daniel said carefully, "but I also understand practicality. You need a place to live. I have resources that can help with that. Refusing help out of principle when you're about to be homeless isn't noble, Lena. It's just stubborn." "There's a difference between help and rescue," Lena insisted. "If you swoop in and solve all my problems with money, then I'm just trading one form of dependence for another. I need to know I can survive on my own, even if I'm choosing not to." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her worn couch cushion. "Okay, what if we approach this differently? What if instead of me helping you, we pool our resources and figure out what we can build together?" "Pool our resources," Lena repeated slowly. "You have millions. I have $700 and a broken coffee maker. That's not exactly an equal partnership." "Money isn't the only resource that matters," Daniel said. "You have skills I don't have. You know how to run a household efficiently, how to make food that actually tastes good, how to navigate systems designed to keep poor people poor. I know how to read contracts and negotiate deals, and apparently how to walk away from empires. Between us, we have everything we need to start over. Lena wanted to argue, to point out the fundamental inequality in their situations, but something in his logic appealed to her. Not the romantic fiction of love conquering all, but the practical reality of complementary skills creating something neither of them could achieve alone. "What did you have in mind?" she asked cautiously. Daniel's expression shifted into something that might have been excitement or might have been terror. "I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting to bake, about having a small place that makes people happy. What if we actually did that? What if we used my capital and your expertise and built something real?" "A bakery," Lena said flatly. "You want to open a bakery?" "Why not?" Daniel challenged. "You have the passion and the skill. I have the business knowledge and the capital. It's not charity if we're both invested, if we're both working towards something we both believe in." "Daniel, I bake bread for my elderly neighbor. That's not the same as running an actual business. I don't have training or experience or any idea how to operate at scale." "Neither did I when I started," Daniel pointed out. "Neither does anyone before they begin. The difference between people who make it and people who don't is usually just willingness to try." Lena felt something dangerous stirring in her chest, the same reckless hope that had gotten her into this situation in the first place, the belief that maybe wanting something badly enough could actually make it possible. "You're serious about this?" "Completely serious," Daniel confirmed. "Look, I know it sounds impulsive. I know we're still figuring out how to be together without everything exploding, but I also know that I'm about to have a lot of free time and capital with no clear direction, and you're about to need income and purpose. Why not combine those needs into something that could actually matter?" "Because it could fail," Lena said. "Because 90% of new restaurants and bakeries close within the first year. Because I've never run anything more complicated than a cleaning schedule. And you're talking about entrusting me with actual money, actual responsibility, actual stakes." "Yes," Daniel said simply. "I am. Because I believe in you more than you believe in yourself, and someone needs to." The words landed like a physical thing, settling in Lena's chest with uncomfortable weight. She thought about the dream she'd carried for years, the one she'd mentioned to Daniel that first night, and then tried to forget because dreams required hope, and hope required energy she couldn't spare. She thought about Rosa's kitchen, about the satisfaction of watching dough rise and transform, about the simple joy of creating something that made people happy. "I'd need to learn everything," she said slowly. "Business management, food safety regulations, accounting, marketing. I can't just walk into this blind." "So we learn together," Daniel said. "I'll handle the business side, you handle the creative side, and we both figure out the parts we don't know as we go." That's how every business starts, with people who are terrified but trying anyway. Lena looked around her apartment, at the life she'd built from nothing that was about to disappear anyway, and made a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. "Okay." "Okay," Daniel repeated like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "Okay," Lena confirmed, "but I have conditions. I want this in writing, a real partnership agreement, equal ownership, clear responsibilities. I want to know that if this fails, I'm not just losing a business, I'm losing something I actually built. And I want you to promise me that if we break up, the business doesn't die with the relationship. That we can separate our personal lives from our professional partnership if we need to." "Deal," Daniel said immediately. "Though I should warn you, I have no intention of breaking up with you." "Neither do I," Lena admitted. "But I've learned to plan for worst-case scenarios. It's kept me alive this long." They spent the next week in a frenzy of activity that left Lena exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. Daniel had connections to commercial real estate agents who could find kitchen space, to lawyers who could draft partnership agreements, to accountants who could set up proper business structures. Lena threw herself into research, spending hours at the library reading about successful bakeries, about profit margins and ingredient sourcing, and the thousands of details that separated dreams from functioning businesses. Rosa became their unofficial advisor, offering recipes and warnings in equal measure. "You're moving fast," she told Lena one evening over tea. "Too fast, maybe. You sure you're ready for this?" "No," Lena admitted. "But I don't think I'll ever feel ready. And if I wait until I'm sure, I'll wait forever. That boy, Rosa said, and there was something complicated in her voice. He's good to you. But good isn't always enough. You make sure you're doing this for you, not just because he's offering you a way out. I am doing this for me, Lena said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Daniel's capital makes it possible, but the dream is mine. Has been for years. He's just the catalyst, not the cause. Rosa studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay then, you'll need my recipe for pan dulce. Can't have a bakery in this neighborhood without proper pan dulce. The location they found was a small storefront in a neighborhood that was gentrifying but hadn't quite gentrified yet. The kind of area where old residents and new money were learning to coexist with varying degrees of success. The rent was manageable, the space had good bones, and the foot traffic was promising. The previous tenant had been a failed coffee shop, which meant they already had some basic infrastructure: plumbing, a commercial hood, electrical wiring that could handle industrial ovens. It's perfect, Lena said, standing in the empty space and trying to imagine it filled with the smell of fresh bread and the sounds of morning customers. It's a disaster, Daniel corrected, but he was smiling. But it's our disaster. We can make it work. Making it work required more money than Lena had expected and more labor than Daniel had anticipated. They spent weeks working on the space themselves, painting walls and installing shelving, and learning that neither of them was particularly skilled at manual labor. Lena's hands, calloused from years of cleaning work, adapted quickly to the new tasks. Danielle's did not, and he developed blisters that he tried to hide, but Lena noticed anyway. You don't have to prove anything, she told him one night as she wrapped his damaged hands in bandages. We can hire people to do this. I want to do this, Daniel insisted. I want to build this with my own hands, to know that I contributed more than just money. Let me have this. So they kept working, and slowly the space transformed from abandoned failure into something that looked almost like a real bakery. They installed ovens purchased at auction from a restaurant that had closed. They found display cases on Craigslist and tables from a liquidation sale. Everything was secondhand, nothing matched, and somehow that made it feel more real, more earned than if they'd just bought everything new and expensive. The permits took longer than expected. The health inspections revealed problems that needed expensive fixes. The learning curve on commercial baking was steeper than Lena had anticipated. Scaling up recipes from home kitchen quantities to commercial volumes proved mathematically challenging and occasionally disastrous. The first time she tried to make 200 croissants, she ended up with butter-soaked failures that even the pigeons outside rejected. This is impossible, she said, staring at the mess. I can't do this. You can, Daniel said calmly. You just need practice. Every skill is impossible until it's not. But it wasn't just the baking that proved challenging. The media attention that had died down during their 2-week separation came roaring back as soon as word got out about their business venture. Headlines wondered if this was a real bakery or a publicity stunt. Think pieces analyzed whether Daniel's fall from privilege was genuine or performative. Someone started a betting pool online about how long the business would last. They're taking bets on our failure, Lena said, showing Daniel the website. Actual money changing hands over whether we'll make it 6 months. Then we'll prove them wrong, Daniel said. We'll make it a year, 2 years, 10 years. We'll still be here when they've moved on to the next scandal. But the pressure was enormous. Every decision felt weighted with significance beyond its actual importance. What to name the bakery became a week-long debate. Lena wanted something simple, honest, unpretentious. Daniel kept suggesting names that sounded like they were trying too hard to prove something. They finally settled on Rise, which could mean bread rising or people rising or both, depending on how you looked at it. The logo design took even longer. They couldn't afford a professional designer, so Lena sketched ideas while Daniel provided feedback that was usually unhelpful, but always sincere. They ended up with something simple, a loaf of bread with sunrise colors, clean lines, nothing fancy. It looked honest, which felt right. 3 months after that morning in Lena's doorway, Rise opened its doors for the first time. Lena had been up since 3 a.m., baking bread and pastries and trying not to vomit from anxiety. Daniel had been up since 2, handling last-minute details and checking systems that were already checked. Rosa arrived at 5 with tamales for luck and stayed to help set up the display cases. You ready? Daniel asked as sunrise painted the street outside in gold and pink. No, Lena admitted, but let's do it anyway. They unlocked the doors at 6 a.m. and waited. 5 minutes passed with no customers. Then 10. Lena felt panic rising in her throat. They'd failed. Nobody cared. This whole thing had been a terrible mistake. Then Rosa walked in, officially their first customer, even though she'd been there for hours. "I'll have a coffee and one of those conchas," she announced loudly. "And make it good. I have standards." It was theater. Obvious theater, but it broke the tension. And then, as if Rosa's entrance had given permission, actual customers started trickling in. A few at first, curious about the new place, drawn by the smell of fresh bread that Lena had carefully calculated to drift out into the street. Then more, as word spread through the neighborhood that there was somewhere new to try. By noon, they'd sold out of half their inventory. By closing time, the display cases were nearly empty, and Lena's feet hurt in the best possible way. Daniel counted the cash while Lena cleaned the ovens, both of them too exhausted to speak, but exchanging smiles that said everything words couldn't. "We did it," Daniel finally said. "First day in the books." "One day doesn't mean success," Lena cautioned, but she was smiling too broadly to be truly pessimistic. "No," Daniel agreed. "But it means we're trying, and sometimes trying is enough to start with." The first month was brutal. They woke before dawn every day, worked until their hands cramped and their backs ached, fell into bed too tired to do anything but sleep. Lena learned to bake at volume, to calculate ingredient costs down to the penny, to read customer preferences in what sold out first and what lingered in the cases. Daniel learned to run a register, to make decent coffee, to sweet-talk vendors into better prices and payment terms that didn't crush their thin cash flow. Money was tight in ways that made Lena's previous poverty look comfortable. They'd invested everything into the business, and now they were living on the thin margin between revenue and expenses, hoping each week that they'd make enough to cover rent and supplies for the next. Daniel had sold his penthouse and moved into a modest apartment, shedding the visible markers of wealth like snakeskin. Lena had found a studio near the bakery that was small, but hers, paid for with her own earnings from the business. They ate their mistakes, loaves that hadn't risen properly, pastries that were slightly burned, everything that couldn't be sold but was still edible. Some nights that was all they had for dinner, and Lena would remember her mother eating the same way, making do with what was available, and felt the strange vertigo of becoming the thing she'd sworn to escape while simultaneously choosing it freely. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked her one night as they shared a slightly lopsided cake that had cracked during cooling. Lena considered the question seriously. She was exhausted, financially precarious, uncertain about the future in ways that would have terrified her 6 months ago. But she was also building something real, creating value with her own hands, working toward a goal that she'd chosen rather than accepted. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I am. Are you?" "Yes," Daniel said without hesitation. "I've never been this tired or this uncertain, but I've also never felt like my life belonged to me before. So yes, I'm happy. Terrified, but happy." The second month was when reality hit hard. A bad review from a food blogger with a significant following criticized their pretentious poverty cosplay and questioned whether Daniel's money had bought them better ingredients than their prices suggested. Revenue dropped 30% overnight. Lena wanted to respond, to defend their authenticity, but Daniel counseled silence. "Engagement just gives them more attention," he said. "Better to let our work speak for itself." But when work spoke, sometimes it said uncomfortable things. They had a health inspection that revealed minor violations that required expensive fixes. A commercial mixer broke and needed replacing. The coffee machine died and took their espresso revenue with it. Bills piled up faster than income could cover them, and for the first time since opening, they had to dip into Daniel's remaining reserves to make payroll for the 2 part-time employees they'd hired. "This isn't sustainable," Lena said, staring at the numbers that refused to balance no matter how many times she recalculated them. "We're losing money every week." "We're investing in growth," Daniel corrected. "Every new business loses money at first. We knew this going in." "You knew this," Lena shot back. "I knew how to clean houses. I didn't know that owning a business meant watching money hemorrhage while you smiled at customers and pretended everything was fine." The stress was showing in their relationship. They snapped at each other over small things: inventory decisions, shift schedules, whether to buy cheaper flour to save money or maintain quality at any cost. They disagreed about hiring, about marketing, about whether to expand their hours or focus on perfecting what they already offered. Every decision became a potential conflict. Every conflict felt like evidence that maybe this whole thing had been a mistake. It was Rosa who finally intervened, showing up at the bakery after closing one evening and finding them in the middle of an argument about whether to raise prices or cut costs. "Enough," she said with the authority of someone who'd survived her own share of hardship. "Both of you, sit down and shut up." They sat, chastened by her tone. "You're both so busy fighting about how to save this business that you're forgetting why you started it in the first place," Rosa said. "Lena, why did you want a bakery?" "To create something that matters," Lena said quietly. "To make things that make people happy." "And Daniel, why did you invest in this?" "Because I believed in Lena," Daniel said. "Because I wanted to build something real instead of just managing what someone else built." "So do that," Rosa said simply. "Stop fighting about money and strategy and whether you're doing it right. There is no right way. There's just your way, and you figure that out by trying things and failing and trying again. But you don't figure it out by turning on each other every time something gets hard." Her words settled over them like a weight and a relief simultaneously. After she left, Lena and Daniel sat in the quiet bakery, surrounded by the day's unsold bread and the smell of flour that had become as familiar as home. "I'm sorry," Lena said. "I've been taking my fear out on you." "I'm sorry too," Daniel said. "I keep treating this like just another business problem to solve instead of remembering that it's your dream we're building. I need to listen better, defer more, trust your instincts even when they scare me." "I need to trust them too," Lena admitted. "I keep second-guessing every decision because I'm terrified of failing, of proving everyone right who said I couldn't do this." "You're not going to fail," Daniel said. "We might fail. The business might fail. But you as a person, as a baker, as someone with something valuable to offer the world, that can't fail because it already exists. The bakery just makes it visible." They sat with that truth for a while, holding hands across a table covered in flour dust and receipts, and remembered why they were doing this in the first place. Not to prove anything to anyone else, not to make money, or build an empire or escape their pasts, just to create something honest and good and theirs. The third month brought an unexpected break. A local news station did a feature on new businesses in the neighborhood, and Rise got 30 seconds of airtime showing Lena pulling bread from the oven while Daniel helped a customer. It was nothing dramatic, just a slice of daily life, but it reminded people they existed. Revenue ticked back up. Not dramatically, not enough to solve all their problems, but enough to breathe a little easier. More importantly, they found their rhythm. Lena learned when to trust her instincts and when to ask for Daniel's business expertise. Daniel learned when to step in and when to step back, when his help was helpful and when it was just interference. They developed systems, created processes, figured out how to work together without working against each other. They also learned how to fight productively. Not every disagreement ended with Rosa intervening or tears or someone sleeping on the couch. Sometimes they just talked through their differences, found compromises, accepted that perfect agreement was impossible, and perfect partnership was about navigating imperfection together. By month 4, they were almost breaking even. Not making money yet, but not losing it either, which felt like victory after so much struggle. The neighborhood was learning to trust them, to count on their consistency, to build Rise into their daily routines. Regular customers emerged: the construction workers who bought coffee at 5 a.m., the elderly couple who split a croissant every afternoon, the young mother who came in 3 times a week with her toddler and always ordered the same marble cake. Lena learned their names, their preferences, the small details that made them feel seen. It reminded her of cleaning houses, actually. That same attention to what people needed even when they didn't articulate it. Except now she was visible in the exchange, a participant rather than a ghost moving through other people's spaces. "I think we might actually make it," she told Daniel one night as they locked up. "I think this might actually work." "Of course it'll work," Daniel said. "I never doubted it." "Liar," Lena said affectionately. "You've doubted it at least as much as I have." "Okay, yes," Daniel admitted. "But I never doubted you, and that made all the difference." The breakthrough came in month 5 when a food critic from a legitimate publication came in unannounced and ordered everything on the menu. They didn't know who she was. She looked like any other customer, polite but not effusive, taking notes on her phone that could have been work emails or grocery lists. She left a generous tip and a smile, and Lena thought nothing of it. 2 weeks later, the review appeared online. It was titled "Rise Where Bread and Second Chances Both Get Made Right," and it was the kind of thoughtful, positive coverage that money literally couldn't buy. The critic praised Lena's technique, her intuitive understanding of fermentation and flavor, the way her bread managed to be both rustic and refined. She noted the bakery's humble origins, Daniel's transition from billionaire to baker, but framed it as genuinely admirable rather than performance or publicity stunt. "This isn't poverty tourism," the review concluded. "This is two people building something real with skill, dedication, and the kind of authentic passion that can't be manufactured. Rise deserves your attention and your business." The review went viral in the way that local food writing occasionally did. Shared on social media, picked up by aggregator sites, recommended by influencers who'd never actually visited but liked the story it represented. Within a week, they had lines out the door, inventory selling out by noon, customer demand that exceeded their capacity to supply. "This is amazing," Lena said, watching the line of customers snake down the block. "This is terrifying," Daniel corrected. "We're not ready for this kind of volume." He was right. The sudden surge in demand exposed all their limitations. They didn't have enough ovens, enough staff, enough space to produce what people wanted. They had to turn customers away, had to post apologetic signs about selling out early, had to watch potential revenue walk away because they simply couldn't scale fast enough. "We need to expand," Daniel said. "Hire more bakers, get another oven, extend our hours." "We need to be careful," Lena countered. "Every business that grows too fast ends up collapsing under its own weight. I'd rather stay small and sustainable than get big and fail." It was an old argument in new clothes, Lena's instinct for caution versus Daniel's willingness to take calculated risks. But now they had evidence, data, actual customer demand to inform the decision rather than just fear and hope. They compromised, as they'd learned to do. They hired one experienced baker to help with production, extended their hours modestly, invested in a second oven that would let them double their output without doubling their overhead. The changes were incremental rather than revolutionary, expansion that felt manageable rather than reckless. It worked. By month 6, they were consistently profitable, paying themselves modest salaries, building reserves for the inevitable emergencies that every business faced. The media attention had mostly faded, moving on to newer scandals and fresher stories. What remained were the fundamentals: good product, consistent quality, fair prices, honest service. Lena started developing new recipes, experimenting with flavors and techniques she'd never had the bandwidth to explore during survival mode. Daniel took a small business management course at night, filling gaps in his knowledge and networking with other entrepreneurs who were navigating similar challenges. They were building something sustainable, something that belonged to them, something that felt like it might actually last. One evening, 6 months and 3 weeks after that morning in Lena's doorway, when Daniel had appeared with coffee and confession, they sat in the bakery after closing and looked at the numbers together. "We did it," Daniel said quietly. "We actually built something that works." "We did," Lena agreed, and felt the truth of it settle in her chest. Not just that the business was succeeding, but that she had succeeded, had taken a dream and made it real through effort and skill and the willingness to keep trying when failure seemed inevitable. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers flour-dusted and calloused in ways they'd never been before. "I need to ask you something important." Lena's heart jumped. They'd been so focused on the business, on survival and success and getting through each day, that they hadn't had time to think about their relationship beyond its daily maintenance. They still loved each other. That had never been in question, but they'd been too exhausted most nights to be romantic, too stressed to be anything other than partners in crisis. "What?" she asked, half afraid of what he might say. Daniel pulled something from his pocket, a small box that made Lena's breath catch. But when he opened it, she saw not a ring, but a key. "I found us a house," he said. "Small, affordable, nothing fancy. But it has a yard and a real kitchen and enough space that we're not living on top of each other." I put an offer in yesterday, contingent on you agreeing that this is what you want. Because I don't want to assume. I don't want to make decisions that affect both of us without you being equally invested in the choice. So I'm asking, will you build a home with me the same way we built this business? Together, equally, honestly? Lena looked at the key, at this man who'd learned to ask instead of assume, to offer instead of impose, to make her a partner in every decision that mattered. She thought about the life they were building, imperfect and hard-won, and entirely their own. Yes, she said simply, let's build a home. And in a bakery that smelled like butter and possibility, surrounded by the evidence of what they could create when they chose each other, Lena Morales finally allowed herself to believe that she was exactly where she belonged. The house was a modest two-bedroom in a neighborhood that was neither trendy nor forgotten, the kind of place where people actually lived instead of just invested. It had good bones beneath peeling paint, a kitchen that needed updating but had potential, and a backyard that was mostly weeds but could become something with effort. Standing on the front porch with Daniel, Lena could see both what it was and what it could be, a metaphor she was getting used to applying to her entire life. It needs work, Daniel said, watching her face carefully. A lot of work, but the inspector says it's structurally sound, and the price is reasonable if we're willing to put in sweat equity. More manual labor, Lena said with a slight smile. Your hands are just recovering from the bakery renovation. Then they'll develop better calluses this time, Daniel replied. What do you think? Lena walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing on hardwood floors that were scratched but solid. She imagined furniture they'd pick out together, walls they'd paint in colors they'd debate about, routines they'd build in a space that belonged to both of them equally. It was terrifying and perfect in equal measure. I think it's ours, she said finally, if you're sure about this. I've never been more sure of anything, Daniel said, and pulled her close. Except maybe that night at La Lumiere when I decided to talk to the sad woman at the bar instead of eating alone. That worked out pretty well. They closed on the house 3 weeks later, using money from the bakery's profits and the last of Daniel's liquidated assets. Every dollar felt earned rather than inherited, which made the purchase feel more like an achievement than a transaction. Rosa came to the closing with a bottle of cheap champagne and stern advice about property maintenance. The real estate agent looked vaguely confused by their celebration. It was just a modest house in an unremarkable neighborhood, after all. But to Lena it represented something she'd never thought she'd have. Security, permanence, a future she'd chosen instead of accepted. They moved in on a Saturday with help from the bakery staff and several customers who'd become friends. Lena didn't have much to contribute. Her furniture from the studio apartment was barely worth moving. But Daniel had surprisingly little as well. He'd sold or donated most of his expensive belongings when he'd left the penthouse, keeping only what had actual meaning or utility. They furnished the house slowly, piece by piece, from thrift stores and estate sales, building a home from mismatched chairs and secondhand tables that somehow cohered into something that felt entirely theirs. The bakery continued to grow steadily. They'd found their rhythm, their customer base, their place in the neighborhood ecosystem. Lena had trained 2 more bakers, building a team that could handle production even when she wasn't there. Daniel had developed systems for inventory and ordering that kept them consistently stocked without excessive waste. They were making money, not getting rich, but earning enough to live comfortably, to save for emergencies, to occasionally splurge on dinners that weren't their own mistakes. But success brought new complications. A commercial development company approached them about opening a second location in a wealthier neighborhood. A reality TV producer contacted them about a show following their journey from billionaire and housekeeper to business partners. A publisher wanted to buy the rights to their story for a book that would probably be ghost-written and definitely be sensationalized. We should say no to all of it, Lena said after the latest pitch meeting. We should focus on what we have instead of chasing what we could have. Agreed, Daniel said. Daniels. Though the TV money would have been nice. The TV exposure would have destroyed us, Lena corrected. We'd become performers again instead of people. I'm done being entertainment for other people's consumption. They turned down every offer, every opportunity to expand beyond what they could personally manage. It wasn't about fear of success. It was about protecting what they'd built, maintaining the intimate scale that made rise feel special instead of scalable. Some opportunities you chased, and some you let pass by. Learning the difference was its own kind of wisdom. 8 months after opening the bakery, 9 months after that first dinner at La Lumiere, Daniel proposed. Not with flower and keys this time, but properly, traditionally, in their backyard on a Sunday morning while Lena was trying to coax tomatoes from stubborn soil. He'd been helping her dig holes for seedlings, both of them dirty and sweaty and entirely unglamorous, when he suddenly set down his trowel and pulled a ring from his pocket. "I know I already asked you to build a home with me," he said, "and a business, and a life. But I want to make it official. I want to marry you, Lena. I want everyone to know that you choosing me is the best thing that's ever happened, and I'm choosing you right back, every day for the rest of our lives." The ring was simple. A small diamond that had belonged to his grandmother, the one family member who'd apparently approved of him walking away from the empire. It wasn't expensive or showy, but it was real, and it was offered with hands that shook slightly because he was genuinely nervous about her answer. Lena looked at this man who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd chosen her when she was convinced she wasn't worth choosing, who'd learned to build a life with his own hands instead of his inherited wealth. She thought about the journey from that humiliating first date to this garden they were growing together, about every choice and compromise and moment of courage that had brought them here. "Yes," she said, and watched his face transform with relief and joy. "Obviously, yes." They kissed there in the dirt, surrounded by plants that might or might not survive but were at least getting a chance to try, and Lena felt something settle in her chest that she'd been carrying for 26 years without knowing it. The constant anxiety that she wasn't enough, would never be enough, could never earn the kind of love that stayed. Daniel's presence in her life hadn't magically erased that fear, but it had given her evidence against it. Proof that she was worth choosing, worth fighting for, worth the complications. They planned a small wedding because neither of them wanted the spectacle of a large one. Just close friends, Rosa and her family, a few bakery regulars who'd become genuinely important to them. They considered eloping to avoid any media attention, but that felt like hiding, and they were done hiding. Daniel's family was not invited. His mother had made her position clear through lawyers and frozen bank accounts, and a series of increasingly hostile communications about what Daniel was throwing away. His sister Diana had sent a single message after learning about the engagement. "Congratulations on your poverty cosplay. I give it 2 years before you're begging to come back." Daniel had blocked her number without responding. "Some bridges aren't worth maintaining," he'd told Lena. "And family that treats you like an investment portfolio instead of a person isn't really family." The bakery became their wedding venue, transformed on a Sunday morning when they were normally closed. They brought in tables and chairs, flowers that Lena had grown herself, food from the neighborhood restaurants whose owners had become friends. It was modest and imperfect and entirely authentic, which made it perfect in all the ways that actually mattered. Rosa walked Lena down the makeshift aisle between tables of bread, wearing a dress they'd found at a consignment shop, and altered together over several evenings of conversation and nervous excitement. Daniel waited at the front in a simple suit, his expression doing complicated things that made Lena's heart race. The ceremony was brief, officiated by a friend who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose. They'd written their own vows because the traditional ones felt too generic for what they'd actually promised each other. Daniel went first, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly working its way through him. "Lena, you taught me that being seen is different from being known, and being known is different from being valued. You taught me that choosing a life matters more than inheriting one, and that building something with your own hands gives it meaning that money can't buy. I promise to keep choosing you, keep learning from you, keep building with you. I promise to see you clearly, even when you'd rather be invisible. I promise to be your partner in every sense of that word, equal, honest, present. I love you more than I knew I could love anyone." Then Lena, her voice less steady, but no less certain. "Daniel, you saw me when I'd convinced myself that being invisible was safer than being noticed. You chose me when I was sure I wasn't worth choosing. You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing things anyway because they matter more than the fear. I promise to keep showing up, keep being honest, keep building this improbable life we've somehow created. I promise to call you out when you're being privileged, to let you help when I'm being too stubborn, to remember that partnership means accepting support as much as providing it. I love you for seeing me, for choosing me, for building this beautiful disaster with me." They exchanged rings, his from the same jeweler where they'd had Lena's resized, simple bands that matched in spirit, if not design. When the officiant pronounced them married and told Daniel he could kiss his bride, the small crowd erupted in applause that felt earned rather than obligatory. The reception was cake and champagne and dancing to music from someone's phone connected to borrowed speakers. It wasn't elegant or sophisticated, but it was joyful in the uncomplicated way that came from people genuinely happy for each other's happiness. Rosa cried and claimed it was allergies. The baker who'd been their first hire gave a toast about learning what good leadership looked like. A regular customer presented them with a painting she'd made of the bakery, capturing it in afternoon light with customers visible through the windows. As the sun set and the party wound down, Lena and Daniel stood in their bakery surrounded by the evidence of community they'd built, and Lena felt the impossible distance between that first humiliating dinner and this moment of celebration. She'd walked into La Lumiere convinced she was worthless. She was leaving her own wedding reception knowing she was worth exactly what she'd always been worth, everything. She just needed someone to see it clearly enough to help her see it herself. They honeymooned by closing the bakery for a week and actually sleeping in, something neither of them had done since opening. They painted the bedroom in their house, worked in the garden, cooked meals together in their kitchen, and remembered what it felt like to exist without constant urgency. It was restorative in ways Lena hadn't known she needed. When they returned to work, they found the business had survived their absence. Their team was competent enough to handle a week without direct supervision, which felt like its own kind of success. They'd built something that could function without them, which paradoxically meant they'd built it right. Lena's life settled into a routine that felt both ordinary and miraculous. Wake at 4 to start baking, work until early afternoon. Come home to a house that was slowly improving with each weekend project. Have dinner with her husband, a word that still felt foreign and wonderful on her tongue. Sleep in a bed she owned, in a house she'd chosen, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow wouldn't bring eviction notices or unexpected crises. It wasn't perfect. The bakery still had hard days, slow weeks, equipment failures that required expensive repairs. She and Daniel still fought about money and expansion and whether to hire another person or keep the team small. The house needed constant maintenance they could barely afford and definitely couldn't ignore. Life remained complicated and demanding and full of challenges that didn't care about their love story. But it was theirs. Every struggle, every small victory, every moment of doubt and determination, it belonged to them in a way nothing had before. They weren't performing for cameras or living up to anyone's expectations. They were just existing, building, growing into the people they wanted to be instead of the people circumstances had made them. A year after their wedding, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, Lena was pulling bread from the oven when a familiar face appeared at the counter. Catherine Westbrook, the board member who'd been so cruel at the gala, stood there looking uncomfortable and slightly defiant. "I'd like to order some bread," she said stiffly. Lena wiped flour from her hands and approached the counter with careful neutrality. "What can I get you?" "Whatever you recommend," Catherine said. "I've been hearing good things about this place." Lena studied her for a moment, trying to determine if this was some new form of harassment or genuine olive branch. "The sourdough is good today. We also have focaccia with rosemary and sea salt if you want something more interesting." "Both then," Catherine said. She paused, clearly struggling with something. "I owe you an apology." Lena blinked. "I'm sorry?" "At the gala, I was cruel and classist and everything that's wrong with people who've had money so long they've forgotten it's not a moral virtue." Catherine's discomfort was obvious, but apparently sincere. "I've been watching what you and Daniel built here. It's impressive. More impressive than anything his family ever created because you did it through actual work instead of inheritance and exploitation." "Thank you," Lena said carefully, still uncertain where this was going. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Catherine continued. "I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I was wrong about you, wrong about what you and Daniel were doing, wrong to judge something I didn't understand because it threatened my comfortable assumptions about how the world works." Lena packaged the bread, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind processed this unexpected development. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm trying to be better, Catherine said simply. Because watching you succeed while people like me predicted failure has been humbling. Because apologizing cost me nothing, and I hoped it might mean something to you. It does, Lena admitted. More than you probably realize. Catherine paid for the bread and left, and Lena stood there processing what had just happened. Not everyone who'd hurt them had apologized. Diana certainly hadn't. Daniel's mother had doubled down on her disapproval, cutting him off completely and making sure every family member knew that choosing Lena meant choosing exile. But Catherine's apology suggested something Lena hadn't dared hope for, that maybe their success wasn't just personal, wasn't just about them. Maybe by refusing to be ashamed, by building something real despite everyone's predictions of failure, they'd challenge the assumptions that kept people like her invisible and people like Daniel trapped in inherited expectations. When she told Daniel about the encounter that evening, he was quiet for a long moment. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The complications, the judgment, everything you've dealt with because of me?" "Never," Lena said firmly. "Do you? Regret walking away from everything you had?" "I didn't walk away from everything," Daniel corrected. "I walked away from things that were killing me slowly. I walked toward things that made me feel alive. There's a difference." They sat on their back porch as the sun set, watching tomatoes finally thriving in soil they'd amended together, and Lena thought about the distance traveled. From that first dinner where she'd felt so out of place to this ordinary evening where she felt entirely at home. From cleaning houses invisible to running a business visible. From being someone's temporary interest to being someone's permanent choice. The media attention had faded almost completely by now. Occasionally someone would recognize them or remember the story, but mostly they'd become just another small business in a city full of small businesses, remarkable only to the people who loved them and the customers who appreciated what they offered. That anonymity felt like victory. They'd survived the scrutiny, outlasted the predictions of failure, proven that their relationship was real and their business was sustainable. They'd become boring in the best possible way, stable, consistent, ordinary in their extraordinariness. On their second wedding anniversary, they closed the bakery early and hosted a celebration that had grown beyond their original intention. What was supposed to be intimate dinner with Rosa had evolved into a full party as more people asked to come, as the community they'd built wanted to celebrate with them. The bakery filled with laughter and food and the kind of easy joy that came from people who genuinely liked each other. Lena moved through the crowd feeling something she'd never experienced before. The sensation of belonging completely, of being exactly where she was supposed to be, surrounded by people who saw her clearly and valued her accordingly. Daniel found her near the end of the evening, pulled her into a quiet corner, and kissed her with the kind of tenderness that came from knowing someone deeply and choosing them anyway. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Lena asked. "For being brave enough to say yes that first night, for giving us a chance when you had every reason to protect yourself, for building this life with me." He gestured to the bakery, the people, the evidence of everything they'd created. "None of this exists without you being willing to risk disappointment one more time. None of this exists without you seeing me when I was invisible," Lena countered. "We did this together." "Together," Daniel agreed. "Every impossible, beautiful, terrifying step of it." As the party continued around them, Lena thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago. Broke, scared, convinced her life had peaked at surviving rather than thriving. She thought about the green dress purchased with money she didn't have, the hope she'd carried into that restaurant only to have it crushed by a text message. She thought about how close she'd come to never knowing what was possible if she just had the courage to stay visible long enough for someone to actually see her. The journey from that humiliation to this celebration hadn't been smooth or simple. It had required more courage than she'd known she possessed, more resilience than seemed fair to demand, more faith in possibilities than her experience had earned. But standing here now, in a bakery she owned, surrounded by communities she'd built, married to a man who'd chosen her so completely, he'd rebuilt his entire life to prove it. Lena understood something fundamental. Being invisible had never been about whether people could see her. It had been about whether she'd given herself permission to be seen. Whether she'd believed she was worth the attention, worth the effort, worth the complications that came with being visible. Daniel had seen her when she was still learning that permission. But ultimately, Lena had saved herself. She'd chosen to stay for dinner instead of fleeing the restaurant. She'd chosen to try when every instinct screamed protection. She'd chosen to believe in possibility when evidence suggested impossibility. Love hadn't rescued her from poverty or struggle or the hard work of building a life worth living. But it had given her a partner in that work, someone who saw her clearly enough to help her see herself, someone who chose her so consistently that she finally learned to choose herself with the same certainty. The party wound down as evening became night. Friends departed with promises to return, with compliments about the food and the celebration and how beautiful it all was. Rosa left last, as always, with a hug that conveyed everything words couldn't and a stern reminder to lock up properly. Finally alone in their bakery, Lena and Daniel cleaned up the remnants of celebration in comfortable silence. When the last dish was washed and the last chair was stacked, they stood together in the space they'd created and looked at what they'd built. "We should go home," Daniel said eventually. "We should," Lena agreed. But neither of them moved immediately, both savoring this moment of completion, of having survived not just the struggle, but the success that followed it. When they finally locked the door and walked to their car, Lena took one last look at Rise. The simple sign, the warm lights visible through the window, the evidence of what happened when people chose courage over comfort, partnership over performance, authenticity over approval. 2 years ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was seen, known, valued. The journey between those states had required more than she'd thought she had to give. But standing here with Daniel's hand in hers, with a home waiting and a business thriving and a future unfolding in ways she couldn't predict but no longer feared, Lena understood the fundamental truth that had eluded her for so long. She'd always been worth seeing. She'd just needed someone to look closely enough, consistently enough, to help her remember that her worth had never been in question. Only her willingness to claim it had been uncertain. Now, finally, she claimed it fully. Claimed the life she'd built, the love she'd earned, the success she'd created through skill and determination, and the refusal to accept that invisible was permanent. As they drove through Los Angeles toward the home they'd chosen together, Lena felt the weight of the past 2 years settle into something that felt like peace. Not the absence of struggle. Life would always be hard in ways both predictable and surprising, but the presence of purpose, partnership, and the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The green dress still hung in her closet, preserved like a relic of who she'd been before everything changed. Sometimes she'd look at it and remember that terrible, wonderful night when humiliation had transformed into opportunity, when being stood up had led to being seen, when the worst evening of her year had become the first chapter of a story she was still writing. But mostly, Lena didn't need to look back. The evidence of who she'd become was all around her, in the flower under her fingernails and the house key in her pocket, in the wedding ring on her finger and the business card in her wallet that read, "Lena Harrington, co-owner, Rise Bakery." She'd risen indeed, not from poverty to wealth in the fairy tale sense, but from invisibility to visibility, from survival to purpose, from accepting what life handed her to actively creating what she wanted it to be. And in a city built on dreams that usually disappointed, Lena Morales, Lena Harrington now, had discovered that the most powerful dreams were the ones you built yourself. One choice at a time, one day at a time, until suddenly you looked up and realized you were living something you'd once only dared to hope for. The road ahead would have challenges. Money would sometimes be tight. The business would face competition and complications. Life would deliver the 1,000 small difficulties that tested every partnership and every enterprise. But they'd face it together, Daniel and Lena, equal partners in a life they'd chosen rather than inherited or accepted. And that choice, renewed daily through work and compromise and the simple act of continuing to show up for each other, made every difficulty worth facing. In the end, their story wasn't about a billionaire who fell in love with his housekeeper. It was about two people who saw each other clearly, chose each other honestly, and built something real in a world that preferred performance. It was about having the courage to be visible even when invisibility felt safer, to try even when failure seemed likely, to believe in possibilities that evidence hadn't yet confirmed. It was about choosing love, choosing work, choosing partnership, choosing themselves. And that choice, made daily with flour-dusted hands and honest hearts, was the only happy ending that ever really mattered.